Welcome, my friend, to a gentle corner of time, to the sleeping hourglass. Tonight, we will step into the moonlit chambers of ancient Egypt, where desert winds carry the echoes of a queen's voice. Her name is Cleopatra, a woman remembered not only for her throne, but as the last breath of a dying empire. Her story is a weaving of brilliance and ruin, of power and tenderness, of choices that shape the destiny of nations. And if you find comfort here, if this space feels like a gentle resting place, you're welcome to subscribe or to leave a soft trace of support. It helps keep the sleeping hourglass alive, a little sanctuary of quiet history for those who wander here in the dark. The night sky over Egypt stretches vast and unbroken, its stars mirrored in the slow, silver shimmer of the Nile. The river moves as it always has, steady, patient, eternal, as though it carries not only water, but memory itself. Along its banks, in the marble halls of Alexandria, a child is born who will one day be remembered as the last sovereign breath of an ancient kingdom. Her name is Cleopatra, daughter of the Ptolemies, heir to a throne already heavy with centuries of glory and ruin. The Nile cradles her birth, its current whispering secrets to the reeds. This river has witnessed the rise of pharaohs and the fall of dynasties, yet it flows unchanged, indifferent to human frailty. To be born in its shadow is to be tied to eternity. And yet eternity, as Cleopatra will one day learn, is fragile when measured against the shifting tides of empires. Her family, the Ptolemies, are rulers of Egypt but children of Greece. Centuries earlier, when Alexander the Great carved his empire into pieces, his general Ptolemy claimed the Nile as his dominion. From that moment, Greek kings and queens ruled Egypt, speaking Greek in their palaces while the language of the people remained Egyptian in the streets. Cleopatra is a descendant of this house, a dynasty glittering with jewels, but trembling under the weight of its own decay. The palace walls hold the echoes of rivalry, of kin turned enemies, of blood spilled upon marble floors. This is the cradle in which Cleopatra's life begins, a world where family ties are tangled with ambition and where survival requires more than innocence. The throne she inherits is not simply a seat of power, but a precarious balance atop centuries of ambition and betrayal. Yet in her earliest days, she is simply a child. We might imagine her carried through sunlit courtyards, the scent of lotus and papyrus drifting in the air. The voices of nurses and servants surround her, soft and protective, though beneath their murmurs lies the knowledge that this child is no ordinary daughter. She belongs not only to her family, but to the story of Egypt itself. Already the desert winds seem to murmur her name, carrying it across the sands as though fate itself has taken note. Outside the palace, Egypt is both dazzling and fractured. Alexandria glimmers with marble colonnades, its lighthouse rising like a flame above the sea. Scholars gather in its great library, the heart of the world's learning, while merchants crowd its harbours with ships heavy with spice, grain, and gold. And yet beyond the city's grandeur, Egypt struggles. Its wealth tempts Rome, whose shadow lengthens across the Mediterranean. Its fields depend on the rhythms of the Nile, which can bless with abundance or curse with famine. To be born into this land is to be born into both beauty and precarity. Cleopatra's lineage is marked by more than crowns. It is stained with intrigue. The Ptolemaic dynasty is notorious for its rivalries, for brothers and sisters who fight as much against each other as against foreign enemies. Thrones are not inherited easily. They are seized, defended, and often paid for in blood. This is the inheritance Cleopatra cannot escape, a legacy in which love is a strategy and trust a rare luxury. And yet, within this unstable dynasty, Cleopatra begins to shine in ways that set her apart. Ancient sources tell us that she possesses not only beauty, but brilliance. She learns languages, not just the Greek of her ancestors, but the Egyptian tongue of her people, a rarity among her family. Some say she masters half a dozen languages, perhaps more. Her voice is said to be enchanting, not merely in tone, but in the wisdom and wit it carries. From an early age, she is more than a princess. She is a mind in motion, a spirit attuned to the power of words as much as the power of crowns. The Nile remains her constant companion. Each year, its flood renews the land, spreading black silt across the fields, promising harvest and life. To Egyptians, the river is not only water but divinity. Happy, the god of the flood, the very pulse of existence. For Cleopatra, the Nile is both literal and symbolic. It nourishes her kingdom, but it also teaches her patience, resilience, and the inevitability of change. She grows beneath its gaze, aware that just as the river rises and falls, so too do dynasties. The whispers of destiny grow louder. Visitors to the palace bring news of Rome, that restless power across the sea. Rome, with its iron legions and insatiable hunger, has already bent many kingdoms to its will. For now, Egypt remains free, but its freedom is fragile, bought by wealth, diplomacy, and a throne that must always be vigilant. Even in her childhood, Cleopatra is born into a world where the future is uncertain, where every alliance and every misstep could tilt the balance of history. Yet in these early years, before power becomes her burden, Cleopatra is allowed moments of wonder. She walks the courtyards of Alexandria, where philosophers debate beneath shaded colonnades and astronomers chart the stars. She gazes upon the scrolls of the library, each one a vessel of human thought preserved in ink and papyrus. To grow up in Alexandria is to grow up at the crossroads of knowledge, where East meets West, where myth and reason intertwine. The child becomes the seed of the queen she will one day be. She absorbs the rhythm of her land, the chants in the temples, the songs of labourers by the fields, the hymns carried by the wind at dawn. She learns that Egypt is more than a throne. It is a people, a faith, a continuity stretching back to the pyramids. Though the Ptolemies often feel like outsiders in their own kingdom, Cleopatra will one day set herself apart by embracing Egypt fully, by speaking not only as queen but as daughter of the Nile. In the quiet of night, as lamps flicker in the palace halls, one might imagine her gazing at the stars over the desert. Perhaps she wonders, even as a child, what fate the gods have written for her. For the Egyptians, the stars are eternal, yet they move in patterns that shape human lives. Perhaps she feels, in some unspoken way, that her story will not be small. The cradle by the Nile rocks her into a life destined to become legend. Already, the threads of her story are being woven, threads of power and peril, love and betrayal, triumph and despair. She does not yet know that her name will echo through centuries, or that her death will mark the end of an empire older than memory itself. For now, she is only a child, carried in the arms of the Nile, lulled by the eternal hum of a river that has seen countless queens and kings before her. But history stirs restlessly. The palace walls cannot protect her forever. Rivalries within her family sharpen like hidden daggers, and Rome's gaze grows ever more watchful. The world into which Cleopatra is born is not one of peace, but of fragile balances, each day trembling on the edge of change. And so the child grows, nourished by the Nile yet shadowed by destiny, her innocence already touched by the weight of thrones. Soon, the palace will echo not with lullabies, but with the clash of siblings and the tremor of division, a throne divided, waiting for her to claim it. The Palace of Alexandria is a place of brilliance and shadow. Sunlight pours through colonnades of marble, glinting against polished floors, while gardens bloom with lotus and myrtle. Yet within its walls, the air is thick with whispers. Ambition coils like incense smoke in the corridors. Rivalry is not an intruder here. It is the lifeblood of the dynasty. Cleopatra grows into this world with watchful eyes. She is no longer a child cradled by the Nile, but a young woman whose destiny demands poise beyond her years. Her father, Ptolemy XII, nicknamed Auletes, the flute player, rules Egypt with precarious hands. He loves music more than governance, and his reign wavers between opulence and instability. His throne is bought and defended with Roman favor. His treasury drained to secure their protection. Cleopatra sees in him both the fragility of kingship and the cost of survival in a world where Egypt's sovereignty hangs by a thread. The court itself is a theatre of rivalries. Brothers and sisters are not companions, but competitors, each one measuring themselves against the glittering weight of the crown. Among the Ptolemies, blood ties do not bind. They bind and betray in equal measure. Marriages are arranged between siblings to keep the throne pure. Yet such unions rarely erase ambition. They only make enemies closer, more dangerous. Cleopatra learns early that the throne is less a seat than a battlefield, polished to gleam, but sharp with unseen blades. Her brothers and sisters smile at feasts, their voices lilting with courtesy, while behind closed doors schemes fester. Rumors pass like shadows along the marble halls. Who is favored? Who is plotting? Who will seize power when the opportunity arises? When Ptolemy XII is exiled for a time, ousted by his own people, Cleopatra witnesses the precariousness of dynastic rule. She sees how quickly loyalty can shift, how swiftly the throne can crumble beneath the weight of unrest. Yet she also sees the resilience required to reclaim it. Her father regains power only through Rome's support, proof that the Nile kingdom now survives not by its own might but by the favor of distant rulers across the sea. Cleopatra absorbs this lesson deeply. To reign is not merely to wear a crown, but to understand alliances, to weave survival from circumstance. In her youth, Cleopatra begins to distinguish herself. She listens more than she speaks. She studies the languages of her people, the rhythms of politics, the stories of Egypt's past. Unlike her forebears, who rule as foreign kings upon Egyptian soil, she leans into the identity of the land itself. Already, she speaks not only as a daughter of the Ptolemies, but as a child of the Nile. This difference, though subtle in her youth, will one day mark her reign. But before she can rise, she must first endure the turbulence of her family. When her father dies, Cleopatra ascends to the throne at 18, sharing power with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, a boy of just 10 years. To the world, they are co-rulers. In truth, they are rivals bound together by duty. She is a woman grown into strength, he a child swayed by advisors who whisper ambitions into his ears. The throne, meant to unite, becomes a fault line dividing them. The palace becomes a place of uneasy silences and veiled glances. Cleopatra learns that words, like weapons, can wound or protect. She navigates carefully, but the storm of rivalry swells around her. Ptolemy the 13th's counselors resent her authority. They plot to sideline her, to push her into obscurity while the boy king holds the crown. Cleopatra, however, refuses to be diminished. Her gaze is steady, her mind sharp. She understands that power, once surrendered, is rarely regained. Beyond the palace, the city watches. Alexandria is no stranger to upheaval. Its people, proud yet wary, sense the tremors of discord within the royal family. The markets buzz with rumors, the harbors with speculation. Whispers ripple through the streets. Will the queen prevail, or will the boy king's faction seize the throne? The fate of Egypt rests not in foreign invaders or distant wars, but in the fragile, shifting balance of siblings at odds. As the rivalry deepens, Cleopatra makes choices that reveal her steel. She refuses to be silenced, insists upon her place beside the throne, asserts her image upon coins and decrees. To stand in defiance of her brother's circle is to court danger, yet she embraces it. Her strength is not in brute force, but in presence, a presence that cannot be ignored. The Nile flows on outside the palace walls, indifferent to the struggles within. Each year it rises and falls, flooding the land, feeding the soil, sustaining the people. The river knows nothing of crowns and quarrels. Its constancy is a silent rebuke to the fragility of human power. Cleopatra, in her quiet moments, must feel this truth. She is part of a drama that has unfolded countless times before, kings and queens clashing over authority while the eternal river carries on ancient and unconcerned. Still, she cannot escape the pull of the struggle. Exile awaits her for a time, forced from Alexandria by her brother's faction. Yet exile does not break her. It steels her resolve. She learns that queenship is not only ceremony but endurance. She sharpens her political instincts, cultivates allies, and prepares for the moment when she will return. The palace, once her cradle, is now her battleground. Every pillar and statue, every echoing hall, bears witness to the rivalry that defines her youth. She has entered not merely the pageantry of royalty, but the crucible of survival. Siblings have become enemies, alliances have frayed, and yet Cleopatra remains unbroken. She carries herself with the poise of one who knows that her fate cannot be decided by others alone. History, too, watches closely. Rome's shadow grows ever longer, its leaders casting glances toward Egypt's throne. The struggles of the Ptolemies are not mere family quarrels, but matters of international intrigue. For Egypt is the jewel of the Mediterranean, rich in grain, wealth, and ancient prestige. Whoever holds its crown commands not only a land, but a symbol of power. Cleopatra stands at the heart of this storm, her survival entwined with the fate of kingdoms. And yet, even in turmoil, she does not lose her composure. The young queen, though pressed by rivals, learns to look beyond immediate battles. She senses that her story is not confined to palace walls, but woven into the broader tapestry of history. Her reign will not be measured merely by how she navigates her brother's challenge, but by how she engages the greater powers rising beyond Egypt's borders. The throne remains divided, but Cleopatra herself is not. Her resolve, her clarity, her embrace of Egypt's identity, these are the foundations upon which her legend will be built. Even in conflict, she begins to embody the paradox of her reign, fragile in position, yet unshakable in spirit. And so the Nile flows on, bearing silent witness. The river does not pause for quarrels or crowns. It carries its waters to the sea, steady and eternal, as though reminding all who dwell upon its banks that human struggles are but ripples upon its surface. Cleopatra, the young queen of a fractured throne, listens to its murmur. She knows that power is fragile, but she also knows that endurance, like the river, may yet carry her beyond the reach of her rivals. The throne trembles beneath divided hands, yet Cleopatra's gaze does not falter. Soon, Rome itself will send one of its greatest generals to Egypt's shores, and in that meeting, the course of her destiny will bend like the river at flood. The Nile continues its steady rhythm, carrying with it not only water, but the weight of centuries. Yet upon its banks, the throne trembles. Cleopatra has returned from exile, her will sharpened, her gaze steady. But Egypt is not free to shape its fate alone. The shadow of Rome, vast and unrelenting, stretches across the Mediterranean like a storm that cannot be escaped. By the middle of the 1st century before Christ, Rome is not merely a republic. It is an empire in all but name. Its legions march with iron discipline, its generals wield power like kings, and its wealth is drawn from every corner of the known world. Egypt, though ancient and proud, is no longer beyond Rome's reach. Its grain fills Roman bellies, its treasures tempt Roman ambition. To rule Egypt now is to balance not only family rivalries, but also the hungry gaze of a foreign power. It is into this precarious balance that Julius Caesar arrives. He is already a man of legend, a general whose victories have carried Rome's eagles across Gaul, a politician whose name inspires both admiration and fear. His steps upon Egyptian soil are not those of a mere visitor. They are the steps of a man who knows his presence can shape the fate of nations. Caesar comes to Egypt in pursuit of Pompey, his rival in Rome's civil war. Pompey has sought refuge in Alexandria, but instead of sanctuary he finds betrayal. Ptolemy XIII's advisors have him murdered, hoping to win Caesar's favor. They present his severed head as a gift, a token of loyalty. But the gesture miscalculates Caesar's pride and sense of honor. The sight offends rather than pleases him. For though Pompey was his enemy, he was also once his ally, bound by the ties of Rome. To see him reduced to a corpse at the hands of foreigners fills Caesar with contempt. The palace trembles with unease. Ptolemy XIII's advisors have hoped to secure Caesar's support. Instead, they risk his wrath, and in this moment of uncertainty, Cleopatra sees her chance. She knows that Rome's power is the key to her survival, that without its favor her throne is fragile. Yet, how does one reach a general whose very presence commands armies, whose judgment can make or unmake a queen? The answer becomes legend. Smuggled into the palace in secrecy, Cleopatra is said to have been wrapped in a carpet, carried past guards under the guise of tribute, and unrolled before Caesar himself. Whether it was truly a carpet or a linen sack, the image has endured. The young queen emerging from concealment, her eyes alight with resolve, standing before the most powerful man in the world. It is not beauty alone that captivates Caesar. Ancient writers tell us Cleopatra's charm lies as much in her voice, her wit, her intelligence, as in her appearance. She speaks to him not only as a supplicant, but as an equal, a ruler of one of the most storied kingdoms of the earth. Their meeting is not merely personal but historical. In the stillness of that night, when the queen and the general speak, history itself bends. For Cleopatra, Caesar is more than a man. He is a lifeline. Her brother's faction threatens her throne. Her people are restless, her dynasty fragile. To stand beside Caesar is to cloak herself in Roman power, to wield his legions as a shield against her enemies. Yet it is not only strategy. Between them grows a bond that defies easy explanation, part alliance, part fascination, part hunger for what the other represents. For Caesar, Cleopatra is more than a queen. She is the embodiment of a world older than Rome, a world of pharaohs and pyramids, of temples and gods that had stood when Rome was still a cluster of huts. To hold her hand is to touch antiquity itself, to weave himself into the fabric of an empire that long preceded his own. And in her presence, he finds not a passive consort, but a partner of spirit and will. Their union, whether born of strategy, passion, or both, is a turning point. Cleopatra gains Caesar's support, and with it the means to reclaim her throne. Civil war erupts in Egypt, with Caesar siding against Ptolemy XIII. Battles rage in the Delta, and the Nile itself bears witness to the clash of armies. When the dust settles, Cleopatra emerges not as exile but as queen restored. The city of Alexandria breathes again, though it carries scars. Its great library in the chaos of war suffers fire, scrolls lost, knowledge scattered like ash upon the wind. Yet amid the ruin, Cleopatra's reign begins anew, secured by the strength of her alliance with Rome. At Caesar's side, Cleopatra does not shrink. She walks with the confidence of one who knows she has carved her survival from the jaws of peril. She bears herself not merely as Queen of Egypt, but as partner to Rome's greatest general. Their union is sealed not only in politics, but in blood. Cleopatra bears Caesar a son, Caesarion, the little Caesar, a child who carries within him both the legacy of the Nile and the blood of Rome. The birth of Caesarion is more than personal, it is symbolic. In him, Cleopatra envisions a future where East and West might meet, where Egypt might not be swallowed by Rome but renewed through it. He is a child of two worlds, fragile yet potent, with possibility. Cleopatra, holding him in her arms, must feel the weight of centuries upon him. The hope that her dynasty, so often fractured, might endure through him. Yet hope and peril are never far apart. In Rome, Caesar's connection with Cleopatra raises suspicion. She is seen by some as a foreign temptress, a queen whose influence could sway him from Rome's traditions. In Egypt, too, there are whispers of dependence on Rome, whispers that the queen's survival is bought by foreign legions. Cleopatra must navigate these whispers carefully, knowing that favor is as fleeting as the flood of the Nile. Still, in this moment, she stands triumphant. From exile and rivalry, she has risen to stand beside the most powerful man of her age. Love and strategy, intertwined, have given her back her throne and secured her legacy in the pages of history. The queen and the general walk together through the marble halls of Alexandria, their footsteps echoing with the weight of two empires. Yet beneath the splendor, shadows remain, for Caesar is not merely a lover or ally. He is a man bound by Rome, by ambition, by destiny. His presence in Egypt cannot last forever. His gaze is fixed upon the heart of the Republic, where enemies and allies alike await his return. Cleopatra knows that the Nile may hold him for a time, but eventually the Tiber will call him back. Still, she does not squander the present. She lives in the moment of triumph, aware yet undeterred by the uncertainty of the future. She has learned already that survival is not the absence of danger, but the courage to face it, to turn every challenge into opportunity. With Caesar, she finds not certainty but possibility, and for a queen of Egypt, possibility is enough. The city itself seems to shimmer under their union. Alexandria, with its lighthouse gleaming above the waves, its library whispering with knowledge, its temples and gardens alive with devotion, becomes the stage upon which their story unfolds. For a brief moment, Egypt breathes in peace, its queen and her Roman ally walking together beneath the Mediterranean sun. But peace is fragile and history is restless. Already, beyond the horizon, storms gather. In Rome, Caesar's ambitions stir unease. His rise threatens the delicate balance of the Republic. His name inspires loyalty in some, dread in others. The knives of his enemies are already being sharpened, though he does not yet see the hand that will wield them. For Cleopatra, this chapter of her life is both a victory and a prelude. She has secured her throne, forged her bond with Caesar, and given birth to a son whose lineage bridges worlds. Yet she knows, deep within, that nothing is fixed. The Nile flows endlessly, but human fortune turns like the tide. The queen and the general, bound in love and strategy, cannot hold time at bay. And so, beneath the stars of Alexandria, Cleopatra walks beside Caesar, her heart steady, her mind vigilant. She is not merely a woman in love, she is a queen who understands that even in intimacy, power is at play. Love has become strategy, and strategy has become survival. For now, Alexandria glows with dawn, and the queen stands restored by the hand of Rome's greatest general. Yet across the sea, in the heart of the Republic, blades wait in shadow, and soon the Ides of March will bring thunder to Cleopatra's fragile horizon. The Nile wakes with the sun, its wide waters shimmer with molten gold as dawn breaks, and Alexandria stirs to life beneath the gaze of the great Pharaoh's lighthouse. The city, jewel of Egypt, opens her eyes like a queen rising from slumber, her streets filling with merchants, philosophers, and priests, all bearing witness to a rare season of peace. For a fragile moment, Egypt breathes. Cleopatra, no longer the child queen hidden among palace intrigues, now stands as a ruler beside Rome's most formidable general. Julius Caesar lingers in Egypt, his presence like a towering shadow, yet his arm entwines with hers in both politics and passion. Together, they stabilize the throne. Together, they create the illusion of calm. Alexandria thrives under this balance. The city's marble colonnades gleam in the light, its palaces resplendent with gardens of jasmine and lotus. In the great library, scholars unroll papyrus scrolls to study the stars, the body, the mysteries of language and philosophy. Ships from across the Mediterranean crowd the harbours, their sails filled with goods, amber from the Baltic, spices from Arabia, silks from the East. The city is a crossroads of the known world, and Cleopatra, though young, is its radiant axis. She does not rule from a distance. She walks the avenues of Alexandria, veiled but unmistakable, her presence carrying the weight of a goddess and the grace of a mortal woman. The people look upon her as Isis reborn. They whisper prayers and blessings as she passes, for her very survival is entwined with their own. For a time, Rome's storms seem far away, yet beneath the marble and gold, tension hums like an unseen chord. Egypt's peace is not her own. It leans upon the presence of Caesar, whose armies sleep within reach, whose gaze always turns back toward Rome. The queen and the general walk side by side, yet each walks with different destinies. Still, Cleopatra seizes this pause to weave herself into Egypt's very breath. She holds audiences in the palace, receiving ambassadors from distant lands. She speaks not only in Greek, the tongue of the Ptolemies, but in the flowing, ancient words of Egyptian priests. She understands that to reign as pharaoh is not merely to command, but to embody the soul of a people. Few of her ancestors had embraced the role so fully. She does. She must. In the temple courts, priests raise hymns to her as living Isis. Statues are carved with her likeness, adorned with crowns of cobras and sun discs. On festival days, she appears upon the sacred barge, gliding across the Nile's surface, her presence binding myth and flesh. For the Egyptians, she is not merely queen, she is the divine mediator between earth and gods. The city reflects her radiance. Artists carve frescoes of fertility and abundance, scenes of harvest and renewal. Theatres echo with voices reciting the tragedies of Greece, yet the applause is for a new drama unfolding. The return of Egypt's queen to her throne. Hope, for a while, is no longer a stranger. But the winds of Rome are never still. News filters in like whispers from the west, unrest in the Senate, rivalries sharpening into blades. Caesar's enemies grow bolder, his allies more fragile. Even here, on the shores of Egypt, Cleopatra feels the tremors of Rome's unsettled heart. Her love is with him, yet she knows that Rome claims him more deeply than she ever can. At night, when the palace corridors fall silent, she walks the terraces that overlook the sea. Stars blaze above, their constellations ancient companions of Nile rulers, and she wonders how long this fragile dawn can last. The sea before her is vast, the horizon wide, but beyond it lies a power that will never let Egypt rest in peace. For now, however, Alexandria blooms. Markets spill with abundance. Grapes, figs, honey, papyrus scrolls inked with new knowledge. The laughter of children echoes in courtyards. Sailors chant as they raise their oars, and incense drifts from temple doors. Life, unknowing of the storms gathering beyond its borders, unfolds with fragile joy. In the library, scholars debate the shape of the cosmos. In the museum, physicians dissect and study, their minds bent toward mysteries of life and death. The city remains a beacon, a flame in the darkness of uncertainty, and Cleopatra, moving through its pulse, embodies its brilliance. She holds her son, Caesarion, in her arms. A child born of two worlds, Rome and Egypt bound in fragile flesh. She looks upon him as hope itself, a symbol of continuity, of strength beyond the uncertainty of Caesar's fate. Yet she knows, deep within, that such symbols invite envy, and envy invites danger. The Nile flows on, ancient and indifferent. It has seen pharaohs rise and crumble into dust. It has seen conquerors come and go, cities built and buried in sand. To the Nile, this moment is but a ripple, yet to Cleopatra it is all, the dawn of her reign, the fragile breath between storms. Time drifts slowly, like the current, carrying both promise and shadow. And so Alexandria basks in light, temples filled with incense, streets alive with song, palaces gleaming with polished stone. But even in this golden hour, the queen senses the truth that every pharaoh must face. Peace is never permanent, and dawn is always followed by the slow climb of day toward dusk. For now, she allows herself to believe in this fragile calm. For now, she holds her head high and lets the people see her as eternal, unbreakable, the goddess among them. But already, beyond the sea, the Senate whispers. Daggers are being forged not of iron, but of envy, pride, and betrayal. Caesar cannot linger forever. Rome will call him back, and when he leaves, what becomes of Alexandria's dawn? The queen stands in the glow of morning, radiant yet restless, knowing the sun that rises must one day fall. And as Rome begins to pull her beloved Caesar back into its orbit, The fragile light of Alexandria prepares to yield to gathering shadows. The spring of Rome arrives with a chill that does not belong to the season. In the marble heart of the Senate, men move like shadows, their faces lit by ambition and fear. It is the 15th of March. The Ides and the air is heavy with a silence that waits to be broken. Julius Caesar enters, clothed not only in his robe, but in the weight of power, the kind that stirs both loyalty and hatred in equal measure. His steps echo, steady as if unaware of the storm that coils around him. Blades glimmer. A circle closes. History holds its breath, and then a thrust, a gasp, a cascade of steel upon flesh. The dictator of Rome, the conqueror of Gaul, the man who embraced Cleopatra upon the Nile, falls beneath the hands of his own peers. Brutus, Cassius, and others whose names will be stained by this day strike until his lifeblood stains the floor. Caesar crumples at the base of Pompey's statue, a cruel symbol, for Pompey was once his ally, then his rival, and at last a corpse offered to Cleopatra as a token of shifting loyalties. Now Caesar lies at his feet, undone not by foreign enemies but by Roman daggers. The news travels faster than ships, faster than storms. Rumor carries wings. Messengers move across seas, voices whisper through markets, and in Alexandria, the tale arrives not as ink on parchment but as a thunderclap. Cleopatra hears it, and the marble beneath her feet feels suddenly unstable, as though the palace itself has shifted. Caesar is dead. For her, it is not simply the fall of a man. It is the collapse of an entire horizon. This was the man who gave her protection when her throne was uncertain, who restored her to power, who gave her a son. Caesarion, child of both Nile and Tiber. Through him, she dreamed of uniting two worlds, of building a dynasty strong enough to withstand the tempests of empire. With Caesar alive, that dream shimmered like a possible dawn. With Caesar dead, it trembles like a candle in wind. She walks the colonnades of her palace that night, the lamps flickering low, her face half lost in shadow. Outside, the city hums with life, oblivious to the fracture that has opened across history. Alexandria has known upheaval before. Battles between her siblings, riots in the streets, the endless pressure of Rome's shadow. Yet this feels different. This is not a squabble of dynasties, it is the earth itself cracking beneath her. In Rome, chaos brews. Some rejoice at Caesar's death, believing the republic restored. Others mourn, seeing only betrayal. Mark Antony, loyal general and consul, rallies the crowds with fiery words. The Senate trembles under the force of anger. The streets swell with unrest. Caesar's funeral becomes a theatre of passion, his body displayed for all to see, his wounds counted like accusations against those who struck him. Rome does not find peace. It finds fire. Cleopatra listens to reports carried across the Mediterranean, each one like a fragment of storm cloud. Antony holds the city. The assassins flee. The Senate fractures. Power slips through many hands, but none can grasp it fully. For Cleopatra, the picture sharpens into a question. Who will rule Rome now, and how will they see her? Her position is perilous. She is Queen of Egypt, yes, but Egypt is no longer untouchable. It leans upon Rome, its wealth and grain feeding the hunger of that vast empire. Without Caesar, her ally and lover, she risks becoming a pawn on a board she cannot control. Yet she does not crumble. Cleopatra has lived her life in storms. She remembers the days of her exile, cast out of Alexandria by her brother's guardians. She remembers the night she was smuggled to Caesar, hidden in a rug, daring enough to gamble her throne on the favor of one man. She remembers each moment she stood upon fragile ground and made it her own. So she turns her gaze to the child who carries both her blood and Caesar's. Caesarion, little Caesar, the living proof of a bond Rome cannot ignore. In his small face, she sees not only the memory of a man she loved, but the key to survival. If Rome is to be her rival or her ally, Caesarion may tip the scales. But Rome is not kind to heirs outside its own design. The Senate never recognized Caesarion as legitimate, for that would challenge their control. They see him as a whisper of danger, a shadow of monarchy threatening their republic. Cleopatra knows this. Still, she holds her son close, teaching him the rhythms of the Nile, the legacy of Egypt, the wisdom of pharaohs who walked before. If the world denies him, Egypt must not. In the months that follow, she watches the Mediterranean as though it were a stage. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, emerges from the wings. Young, calculating, his name still uncertain but his ambition sharp. Antony, fiery and loyal to Caesar's memory, stands as counterweight. Rome divides itself, not neatly but violently, into factions that bleed into every province. Cleopatra weighs them as carefully as a priestess handling sacred scrolls. Her choice must be precise, too swift, and she risks binding Egypt to the wrong master. Too slow, and she risks being swept aside. For now, she waits, poised like a hawk upon a cliff, watching the winds shift below. The Nile flows on, indifferent. Its waters swell with spring, its banks bloom with green. Fishermen cast their nets, children play in dusty courtyards, priests chant hymns to gods older than empires. Life continues in Egypt, steady and timeless, even as Rome convulses in turmoil. Cleopatra moves among her people with measured grace, offering presents as reassurance. To them, she is still Isis reborn, still the goddess, queen who binds heaven and earth. But inside, her heart beats against uncertainty, against the echo of knives in a distant senate. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, she imagines Caesar's final moments. His eyes wide, his robe torn, his voice caught between disbelief and pain. She wonders if he thought of her, of their child, of the empire they might have built together. Or was he consumed only by betrayal, by the sting of Brutus's blade? Such questions have no answers, only echoes. Cleopatra does not linger long in grief. She cannot. A queen who lingers becomes a queen who falters. Yet the loss etches itself into her, like a crack through marble, subtle but permanent. She wears her sorrow with dignity, shaping it into resolve. If Rome has taken Caesar, then she will shape what remains into her own survival. The palace lamps burn low. The horizon of history tilts. In the wake of Caesar's fall, Cleopatra stands with her son, her crown, and the fragile balance of empires. The world waits for her next move, and she knows the eyes of Rome. Antony's, Octavian's, the Senate's will soon turn toward her, and so she breathes deeply, steadying herself. The Nile flows. The stars gleam over Alexandria. A queen watches and waits. The daggers of Rome have struck down one man, but their echo spreads across empires. As the dust settles, new names rise from the shadows. And among them is Antony, whose path will soon cross Cleopatra's in fire and fate. The dust of Caesar's murder has not yet settled, and already Rome reshapes itself. The Republic, fragile and trembling, seeks new masters to guide or seize its destiny. Octavian, young but cold with calculation, sharpens his claim as Caesar's heir. The Senate staggers, torn between fear and ambition. And rising in the midst of it, Like a flame that refuses to dim, is Marcus Antonius. Antony, the soldier who stood at Caesar's side, the man whose voice carried fire through the streets at Caesar's funeral. Antony is unlike Octavian. Where Octavian is deliberate, measured, and patient, Antony is restless, magnetic, a force of instinct and appetite. He belongs not to marble halls and cold strategies, but to the battlefield, the feast, the revel. His presence fills a room before he speaks. His laughter carries like thunder. He is a man Rome both admires and distrusts. Too indulgent, too extravagant, too easily swept into passion. Yet in chaos, such men rise, for their energy bends the world to their will. As Rome divides, Antony's shadow stretches eastward. His gaze turns toward the land Caesar once dreamed of binding to Rome, lands rich with grain, gold, and myth. Among them stands Egypt, still sovereign, still mysterious, still radiant under Cleopatra's crown. And so the stage is set, not in Rome's Senate, but upon the jeweled waters of the Nile, where East will meet West in a theatre that blends politics with legend. The year is 41 BCE. The air is thick with summer heat, heavy with expectation. Cleopatra prepares to meet Antony, summoned to Tarsus, a city along the Cydnus River. She knows well that such a meeting is not merely formality. Rome watches, Egypt watches. The fate of her throne may depend on how she appears, how she moves, how she casts her spell upon this soldier who now holds the balance of power in his grasp. And Cleopatra does not enter quietly. She understands the language of spectacle better than any general understands the language of war. She arrives upon a barge adorned with gold and silver, its sails woven from purple silk, its oars dipping into the river with rhythmic grace. Perfumes of incense and myrrh drift into the air, carried by the breeze to the crowded banks. Musicians play, their notes shimmering like heat upon stone. Servants move like dancers, scattering petals upon the water. At the center of this vision sits Cleopatra, clothed not merely in royal garments, but in divinity itself. She takes the role of Isis, goddess of love and rebirth, the eternal consort of Osiris. Her robes gleam with jewels, her face serene, her presence radiant. She does not simply arrive to meet Antony, she arrives as myth incarnate, as Egypt itself carried upon the current. The people of Tarsus crowd the riverbanks, awed by the sight. Stories will say that the air was so sweet with perfume that it intoxicated those who breathed it. They will say that Cleopatra shone like the sun itself, impossible to ignore. Antony waits, expecting a queen, but what he receives is something far greater. A goddess who makes even Rome seem small. When they meet, it is as though two storms collide. Antony, bold and brash, expects deference. Instead, he finds his equal. Cleopatra greets him not as supplicant, but as sovereign, her gaze steady, her voice calm, her presence commanding. She invites him to dine, and though Antony is famed for his feasts, hers eclipses his in splendor. Golden cups, jeweled platters, wines from every corner of the East, and dishes so rich they seem offerings to the gods themselves. Around them, the world shimmers. Torchlight reflects off polished bronze. Musicians weave a tapestry of sound. Servants glide like spirits through the chamber, tending to every desire. It is not merely hospitality. It is theatre, a stage upon which Cleopatra demonstrates power in a language Antony cannot resist. And he does not resist. Antony, who has known countless campaigns, who has seen men die by thousands, who has watched empires bend to Rome's will, finds himself disarmed not by war but by wonder. Cleopatra is no ordinary monarch. She speaks with knowledge, versed in philosophy, languages, astronomy, and politics. She listens with patience, replies with wit, guides with charm. To Antony, she is not only beautiful, she is formidable, alive with intelligence and magnetism. Their bond kindles swiftly, like fire catching dry reeds. Yet it is more than attraction. Each sees in the other what they lack. Cleopatra sees in Antony the military strength and Roman influence that could shield her throne from enemies. Antony sees in Cleopatra the wealth, culture, and divine aura that could elevate him above his rivals in Rome. But beyond strategy, there is something deeper, hunger, joy, even a kind of recognition. They are both larger than life, both creatures of passion, both unwilling to live in half measures. And so begins their union, not yet sealed in marriage, but in nights of revelry, in shared dreams, in whispered plans beneath starlit skies. Antony lingers in Alexandria, drawn not only by desire but by fascination. The city itself seduces him, its libraries brimming with knowledge, its temples glowing with incense, its streets alive with traders, poets, and priests. To a Roman used to the rigid order of his own city, Alexandria is a jewel of wonder. To walk its colonnades with Cleopatra is to step into a living myth. Together, they fashion a world apart. They dine not merely to eat, but to celebrate existence. Banquets stretch into dawn, cups overflowing, music unending. Legends speak of their revels, of Cleopatra wagering with Antony that she could spend a fortune on a single meal, and dissolving a priceless pearl in vinegar to prove her point. Whether truth or legend, such tales reveal the spirit of their bond, extravagant, fearless, unafraid to defy limits. But beneath the laughter, politics murmurs. Antony cannot remain forever in Egypt, nor can Cleopatra leave untouched by Rome. Their bond is not only of hearts but of kingdoms. Together, they imagine a realm where East and West are not divided but united, an empire greater than Rome itself, with Alexandria as its heart. To some, it is fantasy. To them, it is destiny. Yet destiny is never free of shadows. In Rome, whispers grow. Octavian watches Antony's entanglement with the Egyptian queen with cold eyes. To him, Cleopatra is no goddess. She is a foreigner, a temptress, a threat. Propaganda begins to weave its net, casting Antony as bewitched, Egypt as dangerous, Cleopatra as the enemy of Roman virtue. The stage that began with splendor will, in time, darken into tragedy. For now, though, the night belongs to them. The river glitters, the feasts blaze, the chambers echo with laughter and music. Cleopatra and Antony walk together through gardens where lotus blossoms open beneath the moon. They speak of kingdoms yet to be, of children yet unborn, of futures yet unshaped. They are not cautious, for passion has little patience for caution. They are fire and wind, feeding each other until the flame grows fierce enough to be seen across the Mediterranean. And Egypt, for a fleeting moment, feels alive with hope. The queen has found her champion. The general has found his goddess. Two worlds entwine, and the Nile carries their dreams upon its waters. But dreams burn as brightly as they fade. Even as Antony and Cleopatra weave their golden world, the Roman Senate sharpens its knives, and whispers of excess and betrayal gather like storm clouds on the horizon. Alexandria, the city of light, becomes a stage of wonder. The Mediterranean wind drifts across its harbours, carrying with it the scents of salt and spice, incense and wine. Beneath its marble colonnades, life pulses with a rhythm unlike any other city of the ancient world. Part Greek, part Egyptian, part Roman, wholly alive. And in these days, under the gaze of Cleopatra and Antony, Alexandria does not merely live, it dazzles. The queen and the general create together a festival of life. Their banquets stretch into nights that seem endless. The glow of torchlight mirrored in golden cups. Wine flows, music swells, and the air shimmers with laughter. Poets recite verses until their voices grow hoarse. Dancers move like flames. Musicians pluck notes that rise into the night sky like stars. Cleopatra presides at the heart of it, radiant, serene. Her presence both queenly and divine. Antony sits at her side, thunderous with laughter, his broad frame at ease, his eyes alive with both mirth and desire. For those who behold them, it is as though gods walk among mortals. Cleopatra plays the role of Isis, eternal goddess of rebirth, while Antony is cast as Dionysus, the god of wine, vitality, and wild abandon. Together, they blur the line between the earthly and the divine, between rulers of flesh and beings of myth. Their followers revel in this world, not merely because of its pleasures, but because it seems to promise something more. A kingdom where life itself is celebrated, where the boundary between feast and faith dissolves. The people call them the inimitable livers, those whose way of life cannot be imitated. It is not just indulgence. Though indulgence there is in abundance, it is ceremony, a deliberate crafting of existence into art, a kind of theatre in which every cup of wine, every garland of flowers, every melody played upon the lyre becomes an offering to life itself. Cleopatra understands the power of spectacle, just as she once did when she sailed to meet Antony upon the jeweled river. She weaves these nights into legend, ensuring that even her pleasures carry the weight of meaning. But not all see it so. In distant Rome, word travels of these revels, and the Senate listens with sharpened suspicion. To Octavian, cold and calculating, Cleopatra's world is not divine but dangerous. Her banquets are painted as excess, her ceremonies as corruption, her love for Antony as the ensnaring spell of a foreign queen. Rome, which prides itself on virtue and austerity, twists her feasts into proof of decadence, propaganda sharpened into a weapon. What to Alexandria feels like radiance, to Rome becomes shadow. Yet here, within the city itself, there is no shadow, only the warm glow of lamps flickering against marble walls. The music echoing into gardens perfumed with lotus and jasmine. The sight of Cleopatra and Antony moving as though no eyes but their own exist. They build not only a partnership, but a myth, and myths have a way of outlasting empires. Still, beneath the laughter, Cleopatra does not forget the weight of crowns. She knows that power is fragile, that enemies circle, that even feasts are part of a larger war. She delights in the splendor, yes, but she also weaves alliances in whispers at the banquet table, gathers loyalty through generosity, and strengthens Antony's bond not just with her, but with Egypt itself. The festival is not mere excess. It is strategy, cloaked in joy. Antony, too, is more than a reveller. Though his enemies call him weak for lingering in Alexandria, he is not blind. He knows Rome watches, he knows Octavian sharpens his ambitions, but he is also captivated. The city, the queen, the dream of an Eastern kingdom, all these lure him into imagining a life beyond the cold marble of Roman duty. For once, the soldier allows himself to dwell not in war, but in pleasure, in vision, in the intoxication of possibility. The nights unfold like a tapestry. Golden couches, heavy with embroidered cushions, cradle the bodies of guests who lounge in delight. Courtyards overflow with vines heavy with grapes. Fountains gurgle with sweet water, flowers hang in garlands from pillars. In hidden alcoves, lovers whisper in open halls. Philosophers argue beneath the haze of incense. Children laugh in gardens lit by lanterns, their small voices mingling with the chorus of life that the queen and her Roman consort nurture. And always the Nile flows nearby, dark and steady, carrying its eternal current past the city's edge. To Cleopatra, the river is a reminder. Life endures, kingdoms shift, yet the water flows on. She knows that beneath her festival lies an undertow of uncertainty. Rome may not understand, may not forgive. Antony may not always stay. The gods they embody may fade when politics demands sacrifice. But tonight the lamps burn, and she allows herself to believe in the sanctuary they have created. History, however, rarely allows sanctuaries to remain untouched. Even as Alexandria glitters, storms gather in Rome. Octavian spreads word that Antony has abandoned his Roman wife, Octavia, Octavian's own sister, for the arms of Cleopatra. He speaks of Antony's revels as weakness, of Cleopatra's charms as poison. He paints the queen not as goddess but as threat, a woman whose ambitions endanger the republic. The laughter of Alexandria becomes, in Roman ears, a crime. Cleopatra hears these rumors, as all rulers hear the murmur of distant voices. Yet she does not flinch. She has lived her life beneath scrutiny, beneath rivalry, beneath the eternal judgment of others. She knows that power is as much about perception as it is about armies, and she shapes her image with care. If Rome calls her a temptress, she will embrace divinity instead. If they call her excessive, she will answer with splendor. She refuses to be small, refuses to fade, refuses to bow. And so the festival continues. Night after night, Alexandria glows. Some call it decadence. Others call it divinity. But for those who walk its streets, for those who sit beneath Cleopatra's gaze, it feels like eternity, as though for a moment life itself has become sacred, joy itself has become holy. Yet eternity is never given to mortals. The music fades, the wine cups empty, the laughter softens into silence. And though the lamps burn bright tonight, tomorrow they will flicker against the encroaching dark. For beneath the beauty, beneath the revelry, war stirs, not of armies clashing yet, but of words, of rumors, of rivalries sharpening into blades unseen. The festival of life is radiant, but it is also fragile. Cleopatra and Antony create a world of fire, but fire consumes as much as it illuminates. Their joy, their myth, their excess, all these will be used against them. What feels like divinity to Alexandria will, in time, be cast as downfall to Rome. Still, for this fleeting span, the city shines. Alexandria glitters like a jewel upon the edge of the Nile, and the queen and her Roman consort bask in its glow. To their followers, they are eternal. To their enemies, they are dangerous. To history, they are unforgettable. The music lingers in the air, but beyond the feasts and garlands, whispers gather in Rome's marble halls. The festival of life will not last forever, for already the shadow of children, heirs, and fragile futures waits to enter the story. In the quiet hours of Alexandria, when the lamps burn low and the harbour lies still, Cleopatra holds her children close. The Queen of Egypt, who bends senators and generals to her will, becomes something else in the presence of her sons and daughter. Her eyes soften, her voice lowers, her hands, accustomed to the weight of scepters and scrolls, cradle the fragile crowns of childhood. Her firstborn, Caesarion, Ptolemy XV, son of Julius Caesar, stands at the edge of boyhood, tall for his years, his face carrying the sharp outline of Rome's most famous man. To the Alexandrians, he is king already, heir to dynasties both ancient and new. To Cleopatra, he is both pride and peril, for the blood of Caesar marks him not only as Egypt's hope, but as Rome's target. Beside him tumble the younger children, born of her union with Mark Antony, twins born in the heat of Alexandria's summer, Alexander Helios, the boy named for the sun, and Cleopatra Selene, the girl named for the moon. Their names are celestial, but their laughter is earthly, ringing through palace corridors, filling even the marble halls with life. And there is the youngest, Ptolemy Philadelphus, still in swaddling cloths when his father first holds him, the weight of a fragile kingdom pressed into his infant limbs. Cleopatra looks at them and sees not only her children but the map of the world as it might be drawn anew. For in their veins runs a fusion of power unprecedented in history. The Nile's pharaohs, Rome's conquerors, Greece's philosophers, and Macedon's kings. Through them, Cleopatra and Antony dream of an empire that does not merely answer to Rome, but surpasses it, a dynasty that stretches across continents, binding east and west with blood. But dreams are delicate things, as breakable as a child's toy, as fragile as a cradle. Cleopatra knows this. She has studied the scrolls of history, watched kingdoms fall like sandcastles under the tide of ambition, and so she shelters her children within a fortress of rituals and pageantry, surrounding them with the illusion of invincibility. At festivals, the twins are dressed as Helios and Selene, shining sun and gentle moon, embodiments of divine rule. Caesarion is hailed as Pharaoh, son of a god, his small hand raised in blessing over the people of Egypt. The people cheer. They throw lotus blossoms at the feet of the children. But behind the veil of celebration, whispers coil like smoke. Whispers from Rome, whispers of Octavian, Julius Caesar's heir, who sees no room in the world for another son of Caesar. Motherhood has not softened Cleopatra's resolve. It has sharpened it into something keener. For herself, she might risk ruin. But for her children, she will stake kingdoms, gamble armies, challenge the very will of Rome. And yet, beneath the armor of sovereignty, the queen is still a woman. In the evenings, when torches flicker and the city hums with distant music, she sits by her children's bedsides. She tells them stories, not of politics, but of gods and heroes, tales of Isis searching for Osiris, of Horus avenging his father, of the phoenix that rises renewed from its ashes. She speaks softly, her words a shield, a prayer, a promise that though the world may be cruel, there is still wonder to be found within it. The children listen with wide eyes. Cleopatra Selene, bright as her name, clings to every detail, memorizing her mother's voice like scripture. Alexander Helios, restless, wriggles under his covers, already hungry for the grandeur promised by his title. Caesarion watches in silence, his gaze heavy with questions too old for his years. He knows he is more than a boy. He is a symbol, perhaps a threat, perhaps a beacon. And always, hovering in the shadows of these tender moments, is the figure of Antony. Warrior, lover, father. He lifts Caesarion onto his shoulders, laughing as the boy points toward the harbour. He teaches Alexander Helios the feel of a sword, though still too heavy for his small arms. He praises Selene's quick mind, her sharp recall of stories, telling her she is the daughter of a queen and must learn to rule as one. With Ptolemy Philadelphus, he is gentler, softer, holding the infant as though he fears the weight of his own hands might crush the child's fragile bones. In those moments, Cleopatra glimpses something rare in Antony, a tenderness that Rome never saw, a softness that lived only in Alexandria's warm nights. But even within these domestic joys, shadows lengthen. Cleopatra knows that the world beyond the palace is restless. In Rome, Octavian stirs resentment, whispering to senators that Cleopatra is not a queen but a temptress, not a mother but a witch, corrupting Antony and plotting against Rome. He paints their union not as love but as treachery, their children not as heirs but as illegitimate threats. The Roman Senate does not see children, they see rivals. Cleopatra senses this with the clarity of a seer, and so she clings tighter, weaving her children into the fabric of her reign. She stages grand ceremonies in Alexandria, the donations of Alexandria, where Antony proclaims kingdoms for each child. Caesarion is declared king of kings, ruling beside his mother over Egypt. Alexander Helios is given Armenia, Media, and Parthia. Cleopatra Selene is crowned queen of Cyrene. Even infant Ptolemy Philadelphus is granted lands along the Phoenician coast. It is theatre, yes, but also defiance. Each crown placed upon a child's head is a stone cast into Rome's still waters, ripples spreading toward inevitable confrontation. And yet, to the people of Alexandria, it is dazzling. They cheer for the vision of a dynasty that could rival Rome, for children who embody both the fire of Antony and the brilliance of Cleopatra. But history is crueler than dreams. In the hush of night, Cleopatra sometimes lies awake, listening to the soft breaths of her children sleeping nearby. She wonders what future awaits them. Will Caesarion live to rule as Pharaoh, or will Rome's blades seek him first? Will Selene find strength enough to survive in a world where queens are often pawns? Will the sun-bright Helios burn too fiercely, too soon? Will the youngest, Ptolemy, even remember the warmth of his mother's arms if fate tears them apart? These thoughts she buries deep, locking them away beneath her steel composure. For in the morning, she must rise not as a mother, but as a queen. History rarely remembers Cleopatra as a mother. She is remembered as the temptress of Antony, the rival of Octavian, the last pharaoh. Yet within the quiet chambers of Alexandria, there was also this truth. She sang her children to sleep. She pressed kisses to their foreheads. She dreamed not only of empires, but of futures where laughter might outlast war. It is in these fragile moments, half hidden, half forgotten, that Cleopatra is most human and most eternal. For what is a queen, if not a mother to her people, and a mother who dares to dream that her children might inherit a gentler world? But the world is not gentle, and the Senate in Rome sharpens its hatred into weapons. Soon, Antony and Cleopatra must defend not only their crowns, but their children's right to exist. And so the story moves, from the softness of the nursery to the hard clangor of war, as the tide of fate gathers at Actium's shore. The air in Alexandria is heavy, filled with the salt of the sea and the whispers of uncertainty. The queen walks through her palace with steps measured and calm, though beneath her poise she feels the tremors of a shifting world. For beyond Egypt, in the marble streets of Rome, another kind of storm brews, not of winds and rain, but of words sharpened into weapons. Rome has lost Caesar to the daggers of senators, lost unity to the ambitions of generals, but found in one man a rising, unyielding will, Gaius Octavian. Adopted son of Julius Caesar, a youth whose health was once frail, whose voice seemed thin beside the thunder of his rivals. Yet he carries within him a steel colder than iron. Not the flamboyant fire of Antony, not the grand magnetism of Caesar, but something harder, quieter, more enduring. The kind of strength that does not dazzle, but consumes. Cleopatra senses this from afar, though she has never yet looked him fully in the eyes. She hears of his discipline, his patience, his refusal to be swayed by indulgence or weakness. Octavian rises not by charm, but by calculation. His Rome is one of order and suspicion, a city remade under his will. And to him, Cleopatra becomes not merely a queen across the sea, but an obstacle, an enemy, a shadow to be erased. The battlefield is no longer only the Nile or the sea. It is language, it is rumor, it is the fragile perception of a woman cast in the public eye. From the Senate's pulpit, from the scribe's hands, from the streets where Roman citizens gather, her name begins to change. She is no longer the queen who held Egypt steady, who rebuilt a city after famine, who ruled as both goddess and woman. No, in Rome's telling, she becomes something smaller, something darker, a temptress, a foreign sorceress who has ensnared Mark Antony, stealing him from his Roman duty. She becomes the serpent of the East, weaving spells, seducing with perfumes and jewels, luring him into betrayal. These are shadows cast long and deliberate, reaching across borders. They travel faster than armies. They cling to parchment, to songs, to whispers in marketplaces. The war of shadows begins here in the power of stories. Cleopatra knows the weight of image. From the moment of her coronation, she has understood that a queen is not flesh alone. She is symbol, she is dream, she is what her people see reflected in her. The goddess Isis reborn, the Nile's daughter. Now, she feels that image stolen from her hands, reshaped by those who have never seen her face, who paint her with words dipped in venom. Antony, too, feels the pull of this war. In Rome, senators mutter that he no longer belongs to them, that he has abandoned the toga for the silks of Alexandria. They claim he drinks not from Roman cups, but from Egyptian goblets of gold, feasts not with citizens, but with a queen who calls herself divine. It is not only his loyalty they question, but his very soul. Is Antony still Roman, or has he become something else? A servant of Egypt's queen. The truth, as always, is tangled. Yes, Antony shares his life with Cleopatra, and yes, together they dream of kingdoms beyond Rome's reach. They create a world of music, of revels, of ceremony, a vision of East and West entwined. But in Rome's imagination, such dreams are poison. The Republic, wary of Caesar's shadow, cannot bear another leader enthralled by foreign glory. Thus the shadows lengthen. Octavian plays the role of defender of Rome's virtue, of its traditions, of its very soul. To him, Antony is not merely a rival. Antony is a warning, a man lost to the seductions of the East. Cleopatra becomes the perfect mirror for his propaganda, a woman whose ambition, beauty, and foreign blood threaten the purity of Rome. Cleopatra feels the strain of this battle in Alexandria's streets. Traders bring news of slanders whispered in Roman taverns, of plays performed where she is mocked as a harlot, of coins minted with Octavian's stern face, declaring him the true heir of Caesar. She cannot silence these voices. They belong to another empire. Yet they shape the air her children will breathe, the ground her people will walk upon. In the palace she stands before a mirror of polished bronze. She sees her own reflection. The curve of her brow, the sharpness of her gaze, the crown of Egypt resting steady. She whispers to herself that she is still queen, still sovereign, still the goddess of the Nile. Yet she cannot escape the knowing in another land, another mirror is being held up, and in that mirror she is nothing more than a caricature. This is the cruelty of history. It is not only battles won or lost that decide fates, but the stories told afterward. Still, Cleopatra does not yield. She knows the Nile's patience, the desert's endurance. She walks among her people, visits temples, listens to prayers. To them, she is still their queen, their living goddess. They do not see her as Rome sees her. Yet in her heart she feels the tightening noose. For propaganda is a slow poison, weakening resolve long before swords ever clash. Antony, restless and proud, rails against the words spoken of him in Rome. He mocks Octavian's austerity, calling him a man of cold feasts and colder heart. But behind his laughter, Cleopatra sees the wound. Words strike deeper than he admits. He has always been a man of loyalty, of honor in battle, of roaring presence. To be reduced to a pawn in a queen's hand, this bites at his soul. Together they stand, queen and general, against the rising tide of slander. They hold court, they plan feasts, they raise armies. Yet the shadows press closer. For in Rome, Octavian gathers not only legions but legitimacy. He makes himself the guardian of Roman morals, the savior of its traditions. By making Cleopatra the villain, he makes himself the hero. And so, the war of shadows continues. Not with the clash of steel, but with the quiet carving of reputation. In Alexandria, lamps burn late into the night. Scribes write letters, envoys are sent, gifts are dispatched. Cleopatra tries to shape her own story, to remind the world of her divinity, her wisdom, her place as rightful queen. Yet she knows how fragile words are once they cross the sea. They can be twisted, drowned, turned into their opposite. The queen lies awake in her chamber, the sea wind brushing the curtains. She thinks of Isis, of Hathor, of the goddesses who walked before her. Did they, too, feel the sting of unseen voices? Did they, too, have to fight for the truth of their own names? History, she realizes, is not only lived, it is told. And in the telling, it can be reshaped, reborn, remade to serve the victors. She prays that one day, someone will see her not as Rome painted her, but as she truly was, a queen, a mother, a dreamer of impossible worlds. For now, she prepares. The shadows will not remain shadows forever. Words will soon give way to war, and the sea itself will carry the weight of destiny. In the distance, beyond the whisper of shadows, sails are already being raised. The war of words will soon become a war of ships, and the waters of Actium wait. The morning rises over the Ionian Sea, pale and uncertain, as if the very sky hesitates to open its eyes. Beneath it, waters stretch wide, restless with winds that whisper of coming violence. Ships line the horizon, not traders bearing goods, nor fishermen casting nets, but great wooden beasts of war, their oars like restless limbs, their sails heavy with anticipation. Here, at Actium, history draws its breath. Cleopatra stands upon the deck of her flagship, her gaze sweeping the waves. Her vessel is no ordinary craft, a floating palace adorned with gilded sterns and silken banners that flutter in the morning light. Around her, Egyptian sailors move with steady discipline, their hands tightening ropes, their feet firm against the creak of wood. They know this day is more than battle. It is the weighing of empires, the measure of futures. Beside her, Mark Antony prepares, his armor gleaming though his eyes carry shadows. The once mighty general of Rome has fought 100 battles, but none like this. Not merely because Octavian commands the opposing fleet, but because this war is fought not only with weapons but with perception. Rome watches from afar, judging him not only as a soldier but as a man ensnared. Every maneuver he makes will be read as either loyalty or betrayal, strength or weakness. The sea waits. The men wait. The silence before the storm is heavy, thick as the breath before confession. Then, like thunder rolling over water, the first drums beat, oars dip, splashing in unison, and the fleets of Antony and Cleopatra surge forward to meet Octavian's disciplined lines. The clash is not immediate. War at sea is a dance, slow at first, cautious, each side measuring the other. Ships circle, rams gleam bronze beneath the waves, arrows arc into the sky, smoke curls upward from flaming missiles, drifting like dark omens. From her deck, Cleopatra feels the sea itself tremble. She smells the mingling of salt and fire, hears the cries of men already struck, already falling into the waters that will swallow them without distinction. Roman or Egyptian, friend or foe. Antony commands with the voice of a soldier who has known victory, his signals flashing, his orders carrying across the spray. Yet within him doubt gnaws. His men are brave, but Octavian's fleet is leaner, more agile, commanded with relentless precision. The hours stretch, noon burns overhead, and the sea becomes chaos. Ships grind against one another, their decks awash with blood and foam. The thunder of oars is drowned by the scream of iron, the roar of fire catching upon sails. In the heart of this storm, Cleopatra's flagship gleams like a beacon, too splendid, too visible. All eyes drift toward her, toward the queen whose presence at the battle itself defies expectation. No Roman matron would stand here. No foreign queen should dare. Yet Cleopatra dares, her crown flashing in the sunlight, her presence declaring that this is not Antony's war alone, but hers. And yet, even courage cannot still the tremor of inevitability. Octavian's fleet presses harder, his ships tighter in formation, his men drilled to precision. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Antony's forces begin to falter. A ship breaks here, another there, momentum slipping like sand through desperate fingers. Cleopatra sees it. She feels it deep in her bones. The shift, the turning of the tide. Victory is slipping away. To remain is to perish, not only herself but her fleet, her kingdom, her children's future. In the swirl of smoke and flame, she makes her choice. A signal rises from her flagship, sails unfurl, oars strike deep, and her vessel surges eastward, away from the clash. At first, it seems a maneuver, a repositioning. But as her ship slices through the waves, followed by her squadron, the truth spreads like fire among the men. Cleopatra is retreating. On Antony's deck, confusion ripples. His eyes catch the flutter of her sails, the sudden turn of her golden prow. In that moment, the general who once commanded Rome's legions feels a wound deeper than steel. To follow her is to abandon the fight, to remain is to risk being shattered. For a breath, Antony stands caught between duty and desire, between Rome and Egypt, between his past and his present. The battle rages around him, ships colliding, men dying, the sea demanding its sacrifice. Yet all he sees is Cleopatra's vessel vanishing into the distance, carrying with it the pulse of his heart. And so, Antony makes his choice. He abandons the command, boards a smaller vessel, and pursues her. The fleet, leaderless, bewildered, bleeding, collapses behind him. Octavian seizes the moment, pressing the assault, scattering Antony's men. What began as battle ends as rout. By sunset, the sea is littered with wreckage. Bodies float like broken offerings, sails burn to ash, and the cries of survivors mingle with the hiss of waves. The once proud fleet of Antony and Cleopatra is undone, scattered like a dream fading with dawn. Far away, the Queen's ship glides on, the wind heavy with silence. Cleopatra does not speak, she does not weep. She watches the horizon, where the smoke of the battle darkens the sky, and knows that something vast has shifted. Not only the battle, not only the war, but history itself. For defeat does not always come in death. Sometimes it begins in retreat. Sometimes it takes the form of a queen sailing away, of a general abandoning command, of a silence heavier than any shout. That night, as stars prick the sky, Cleopatra stands alone upon the deck. She thinks of Egypt, of the Nile, of the temples that still stand tall beneath the moon. She thinks of her children, their small hands, their uncertain futures, and she thinks of Octavian across the sea who now holds the story in his grasp. He will not only claim the victory, he will claim the narrative. The queen breathes deep, tasting salt and smoke. She knows Actium will not be remembered for the bravery of her men, nor the fire upon the waters, nor the courage it took simply to face Rome upon the sea. It will be remembered as the day Cleopatra fled, the day Antony followed, the day Octavian's destiny was sealed. Defeat has many fathers, many explanations. But history seldom has patience for complexity. It prefers symbols, sharp and unforgiving. Actium will become such a symbol of retreat, of betrayal, of inevitability. Still, Cleopatra lifts her chin against the night. The sea may bear witness to her retreat, but Egypt remains. Alexandria remains. The throne of the Pharaohs, though shaken, is not yet surrendered. There are still days to come, choices to be made, a dignity to preserve. She closes her eyes and lets the wind carry her forward, away from the embers of Actium, toward the next chapter of her fate. The sea has spoken, but the story is not yet ended. As the broken fleet drifts homeward, Alexandria waits, marble halls heavy with silence, and a queen who must walk them with unbroken poise. The sea is no longer a place of glory. Once, its surface shimmered with the promise of conquest. Sails billowing like wings, oars striking rhythm like the heartbeat of empire. Now it carries only the wounded remnants of a dream. The fleet limps homeward, battered and broken, its masts splintered, its decks stained by smoke and salt and silence. The sailors row not with the fire of triumph, but with the heaviness of survival. Their arms ache. Their eyes stare blankly at the horizon. The songs they once sang to keep time have vanished, leaving only the creak of wood and the endless lap of waves. Behind them lies Actium, a wound carved into memory. Before them lies Alexandria, a city that waits with dread. Cleopatra's flagship leads the return, its gilded ornaments now dulled by the smoke of battle. She stands on deck, her figure poised, her expression serene, though beneath the surface of her calm, her heart weighs with unspoken grief. She has learned, through years of court and throne, the discipline of silence. A queen cannot afford despair where her people might see, and so she holds her head high as though the sea itself were her subject and the stars her crown. Antony follows, his spirit dimmed. In his eyes burns a fire not of anger but of shame. He has known defeat before. Every general has, but never one that cuts so deep. For this defeat is not only military, it is personal. The world will say he abandoned his fleet, that he followed a queen instead of duty. His honor is a tapestry unraveling thread by thread, and he knows that Octavian, cold and relentless, will seize upon this unraveling until nothing is left. Days pass upon the water. The fleet crawls toward home, each mile a slow confession. When at last the walls of Alexandria rise into view, they gleam beneath the sun like ivory carved against the desert sky. But even their beauty feels different now, as though draped in mourning cloth. The harbour that once brimmed with confidence receives the ships with silence. Crowds gather at the water's edge, faces pale, eyes filled with questions too heavy to speak aloud. The city knows. News travels swifter than sails. Actium has already entered rumour, already begun its transformation into legend. Whispers in the streets tell of betrayal, of retreat, of doom carried on eastern winds. Some cling to hope, insisting the queen will find a way, that Egypt's gods will not abandon her. Others prepare themselves for what feels inevitable, the fall of independence, the shadow of Rome spreading over their city like an eclipse. Cleopatra walks through her palace once more, her sandals soft against marble floors that echo with the memories of brighter days. Columns rise like solemn sentinels, their painted reliefs of lotus and papyrus seeming now like faded prayers. Lamps burn in golden bowls, their flames wavering as if uncertain whether to hold or to vanish. She moves with dignity, her robes flowing behind her, her jewels catching the lamplight. To those who see her, she is still every inch a goddess, still the living Isis whose presence sanctifies the halls. But within herself, she feels the tremor of fragility, the knowledge that divinity is only as strong as belief, and belief is waning. Her children wait in the inner chambers. Caesarion, tall for his years, carries the bearing of his father and the innocence of a boy not yet hardened by the world. The younger children play softly at her feet, their laughter a fragile comfort in a house that grows quieter with each passing day. Cleopatra looks upon them with a love sharper than fear. For them she must endure. For them she must still carry the mask of certainty, even as the world crumbles around her. Outside, Alexandria braces itself. The streets are restless. Traders speak of Octavian's legions drawing nearer, of alliances dissolving like salt in water. The people prepare, some stockpiling grain, others praying in the temples, their offerings more desperate than devout. They do not know whether to expect battle at their gates or surrender within their walls. Yet all of them feel the weight of change. In the council chamber, Cleopatra listens as advisors debate. Some counsel negotiation, others cry for resistance. Antony, his pride still raw, argues for defense, for standing against Octavian even if the odds are bleak. He speaks with the desperation of a man seeking to reclaim honor, to rewrite what Actium has etched in memory. But Cleopatra hears in his voice not strategy, but pain. He is a soldier searching for redemption more than victory. She says little. Her power is in her stillness, in the way her silence commands attention. She lets them speak, lets the voices rise and clash like waves, until at last the chamber grows quiet. Then she lifts her gaze, and her words fall with the calm finality of stone. Egypt will endure. Alexandria will endure. Whatever path lies ahead, it must be walked with dignity, for though kingdoms can fall, dignity need not. That night, she walks alone through the palace gardens. The air is cool, fragrant with jasmine. The stars reflected in the still waters of the pool. She remembers other nights. Nights when Caesar spoke of Rome's future. Nights when Antony's laughter filled these very paths. Now, the silence presses harder, a silence filled with absence. She feels the loneliness of a queen who has given her heart to men, to dreams, to gods, and yet remains always alone in the end. She kneels beside the pool and touches the surface with her fingertips. The ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection of the stars. So too, she thinks, does history ripple outward. One moment, a retreat at Actium, and the surface of the future distorts forever. She wonders how her reflection will appear in centuries to come. Will she be remembered as a ruler, a lover, a goddess, a harlot, a mother? Or will her true self be lost, blurred beyond recognition by the stories others choose to tell? The night deepens. The lamps in the palace dim. Cleopatra returns to her chamber, where her children sleep soundly, their breaths soft as a lullaby. She gazes at them for a long time, her heart aching with tenderness and resolve. Whatever comes, she will protect them as long as she can. She will carry herself as queen, even as shadows close in. For though the fleet is broken, though the people whisper, though Octavian marches ever closer, Cleopatra remains. She is still the last pharaoh, still the daughter of the Nile, still the woman who has walked through storms and deserts and courts of marble. And as long as she walks, Egypt still breathes through her. Yet, even as she steadies her throne with quiet grace, another shadow grows, the unraveling of Antony, whose fall will bring with it a grief no crown can soften. The walls of Alexandria tremble with the footsteps of an approaching empire. The streets, once alive with music, commerce, and the perfume of markets, now echo with the heavy silence of fear. Rumors weave themselves like smoke through the city. Octavian's armies are near, the Roman tide unstoppable. For Cleopatra, these whispers are not new. She has long heard the sound of history's waters rising against her. But for Antony, the storm breaks with a crueler weight. He had been Rome's thunder once. The golden general, the soldier beloved by his legions, the man whose voice could stir loyalty like a spark could call forth fire. Now he is broken, his army scattered, his fleet lost. At Actium, the gods themselves seemed to turn their faces away, and the retreat that began on the sea has only deepened on land. Every messenger brings not hope, but the shadow of betrayal. His friends defect, his officers surrender, his soldiers melt away like sand slipping through open hands. Antony wanders the marble halls of the Alexandrian palace with a heaviness foreign even to him. He is a man who has known defeats before, but this is different. This is not merely a battle lost, it is his very identity unraveling. For the son of Rome, who once stood beside Julius Caesar and shared in the shaping of empires, to fall so low feels like a cruelty beyond endurance. Cleopatra watches him, her own heart torn between fear for her people and love for the man who now stumbles beneath the weight of his own despair. She remembers the Antony of Tarsus, arriving in splendor, rode upon the gilded barge that glittered upon the Cydnus. He had been radiant then, powerful, confident, his laughter carrying like music across the waters. That man seems a distant memory now, as if belonging to another life entirely. What remains is a weary soul haunted by defeat. In the quiet of night, he speaks of honor. He speaks of how a Roman should meet his end. Not with chains, not in the mockery of Octavian's triumph, but by his own hand. His voice, though steady, carries the tremor of one who already feels the earth slipping from beneath him. Cleopatra pleads, her words a mixture of reason and desperate tenderness. She reminds him of their children, of the strength still within reach. of the possibility, however slim, that fortune might yet shift. But Antony's heart is deaf to such comfort. The shame of betrayal, the bitterness of lost command, the knowledge that he has brought ruin upon those who followed him. All of it coils around him like an iron chain. Rome had taught him one thing above all: better an honourable death than a life steeped in disgrace. The moment comes with the cruel suddenness of fate. Believing Cleopatra has taken her life, Antony resolves to follow. Misled by whispers within the palace, convinced she has shut herself away in death, he chooses to join her. The sword that had once carved empires, that had once lifted him into legend, is now turned upon himself. The steel enters, but the wound falters. Death does not come swiftly. He falls, bleeding, into the arms of his soldiers. Their cries ring out as they lift him, carrying him through the labyrinth of chambers to the place where Cleopatra waits. Not dead, but alive, though cloaked in grief. When he is brought before her, the scene becomes one of history's most haunting tableaux. The dying Roman general laid at the feet of Egypt's last queen. Cleopatra takes him into her arms. Blood stains her hands, her robes, her skin, but she does not flinch. Her voice, trembling yet steady, speaks not to the general who once commanded legions, but to the man she loved. She calls him her lord, her master, her soldier, her husband in all but name. For in this final hour, no politics remain, no empires, no rivalries, only two souls bound in sorrow. Antony, with his last breaths, looks into her eyes. The empire that once burned so brightly within him flickers like a fading candle. He speaks of Rome, of battles past, of loyalty and betrayal, but his words turn softer, more fragile, as though he wishes to leave her with something gentler than war. Perhaps he speaks of love, perhaps of regret, perhaps both, mingled into the sigh of a dying man. Cleopatra holds him until the light leaves his eyes. She feels, in that moment, not only the loss of Antony, but the collapse of a world. For his death is not merely personal. It is the end of an alliance, the end of a dream, the end of a shield that had, for years, stood between Egypt and Rome. The palace falls into silence. Outside, Alexandria stirs uneasily, the people sensing the shift in the air, though they do not yet know. Inside, Cleopatra retreats into mourning, her garments torn, her spirit shaken. She had shared in Antony's triumphs and endured his failures. Now she alone must bear the weight of what remains. Yet even in grief, her mind does not sleep. She knows Octavian comes. She knows Rome will demand submission, humiliation, spectacle. She knows her children's lives hang in the balance. And so, even as tears fall, she begins to think like a queen again, measuring, weighing, seeking some path through the encroaching darkness. But the memory of Antony lingers. His laughter, his temper, his courage, his folly. All of it haunts the halls of the palace. His death is not only his own, but a shadow upon Cleopatra's soul. She has lost a partner in love and in power. She has lost the man who once promised to conquer the world beside her. And yet, as history so often reminds us, grief does not pause the march of empires. Octavian is near. The Roman eagle hovers over the Nile, ready to strike. Cleopatra must rise from her mourning and decide how she will meet the end, whether with surrender, with defiance, or with the quiet dignity that has carried her through all else. The night after Antony's death, the palace is lit only by the faint glow of oil lamps. The queen sits alone, gazing across the darkened city, her thoughts like shadows drifting across stone. She whispers to herself words that no one else hears. Perhaps prayers, perhaps memories, perhaps questions for the gods who have long been silent. History, in its coldness, often reduces such moments to a single line, a brief report in the scrolls of chroniclers. But here, in the silence of Alexandria, the moment is vast, heavy, endless. A queen holds the memory of her fallen general. A woman clings to the ghost of a man she loved. And beyond the palace walls, Rome sharpens its gaze upon her. As Antony's body cools and silence settles over the palace, Cleopatra stands at the edge of grief and destiny. In her heart, sorrow whispers, but beyond her tears lies the approaching shadow of Octavian, an enemy not of passion, but of cold resolve. The queen must now decide how she herself will meet the end. The sun rises over Alexandria with a light that feels almost hesitant, as though the heavens themselves know that this is no ordinary dawn. The waters of the harbour glimmer softly, yet the air carries the tension of an empire's last breath. In the palace, where marble pillars once echoed with music, the silence is heavy. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, walks slowly through the vast halls that have cradled her reign. Each step is deliberate, as if she is pressing memory into stone. Octavian is at the gates. Rome is no longer a shadow on the horizon, but a presence at her threshold. The conqueror comes not with reverence but with calculation, and Cleopatra knows well what waits if she submits. Rome does not merely conquer lands, it parades its trophies. For her, the daughter of the Nile, the woman who once dined with Caesar and dreamed with Antony, the fate that Rome prepares is not death, but humiliation. She imagines herself bound in chains of gold, led through the streets of Rome while crowds jeer. Her children held tightly but helpless beside her. That image burns more fiercely than the thought of any blade. She lingers at a window where the sea wind brushes her cheek. For a moment, her gaze rests on the harbour where her ships once sailed proudly, their sails bright against the horizon. She remembers Actium, the retreat, the smoke, the sound of oars fleeing into the vast uncertainty of defeat. She remembers Antony, his voice low in despair, his spirit crumbling in the shadow of Rome's power. Now his body lies cold, and she is left alone to carry the weight of their shared dream. Within the palace, her attendants move quietly. They, too, know the hour has come. They prepare her chamber not as if for a queen awaiting a conqueror, but as for a goddess approaching eternity. The floor is swept, the lamps burn with steady light, and fresh garlands are laid, their perfume drifting like prayer into the air. Cleopatra herself dons her royal robes, not with vanity, but with intention. She will not be remembered in chains, but in the fullness of her dignity. Her crown rests upon her head, the serpent of gold coiling like fate above her brow. Octavian's envoys come with promises, safety, preservation, perhaps even mercy. But Cleopatra reads the truth in their eyes. Her life is not to be preserved, but displayed. Rome does not forgive queens who dared to rule as equals. She smiles faintly, her silence sharper than refusal. She will give Rome nothing of herself beyond what she chooses. She thinks of her children. Caesarion, her firstborn son, the child of Julius Caesar, who bears the name of two worlds. She knows his existence is a threat to Octavian, a living rival to his claim. She whispers his name in prayer, though she fears what mercy Rome might offer. She thinks, too, of Alexander, of Cleopatra Selene, of little Ptolemy Philadelphus, children too young to understand the storm into which they are being swept. For them, She feels the deepest ache. Yet even a mother cannot stop the turning of empires. She can only choose the manner of her own passing, the story that will remain. The asp is brought to her in silence, coiled within a basket of figs. Its presence is almost ordinary, yet charged with myth. The serpent has long been a symbol of eternity, of death entwined with rebirth, of gods who shed their skin and rise anew. Cleopatra sees in its quiet movement the reflection of her own fate, a silent choice, a sharp sting, and a passage into the realm where pharaohs dwell among stars. She lifts the basket, her fingers lingering on the rough weave, her eyes steady. There is no fear in her, only clarity. She has lived with gods. She has loved with fire. She has ruled against the tides of history itself. Now she will choose her ending. She will not wait for Octavian's triumphal parade, nor will she allow Rome to shape the story of her final breath. This choice, at least, is hers. Before she lowers her hand into the basket, she speaks softly to her attendants. Some weep, begging her to wait, to hope, to live, but she answers with a voice calm and unwavering. Better to meet death as a queen than life as a prisoner. Her words hang in the chamber like a hymn. She leans back upon her couch, arranging herself with grace, her robes flowing like the waters of the Nile. She closes her eyes briefly, and when she opens them, they shine not with fear, but with resolve. The serpent strikes swiftly, a sting, almost like a whisper against her skin. She exhales slowly, her body sinking into stillness. Her lips curve in a faint, enigmatic smile, the same smile that poets and historians will later wonder over, the smile of a queen who mastered even her own death. Outside, Octavian waits for news. When the message comes, he enters the chamber and beholds her body. Even in death, Cleopatra defies him. He sees not a captive queen, but a goddess departed, a sovereign who chose her own fate. His triumph is complete, yet hollow. Rome has gained a province, but the world has gained a legend. Word of her passing spreads like wind across Alexandria. The people weep not only for their queen, but for Egypt itself. They know that with her death, an age has ended. The temples will fall silent, the Pharaoh's line is broken, and the Nile now belongs to another empire. Yet in the quiet grief, there is also awe, for their queen met death not with chains but with choice. Her body is laid to rest beside Antony's, their stories entwined in both life and death. Together, they are remembered not merely as lovers, but as dreamers who stood against the tide of Rome. Though their empire crumbled, their defiance endures in memory, in poetry, in the whispered tales of those who still walk the banks of the Nile. Centuries will pass, and still her name will be spoken. Artists will paint her, playwrights will write of her, poets will shape her into myth. Some will call her seductress, others will call her queen, but none will deny her power. In choosing her death, she ensured her immortality. The asp coils into legend, its venom becoming a symbol not of defeat, but of sovereignty. Cleopatra's choice is remembered as more than an end. It is a final act of defiance, a refusal to let her story be written by others. She writes it herself, in silence, in dignity, in the sting of a serpent whose bite carries her beyond the reach of empire. The lamps in her chamber burn low as night falls. Alexandria is quiet, though the city trembles under Roman occupation. Yet within the silence, her presence lingers, in the marble, in the water, in the endless Nile. A queen has passed, but her echo remains eternal. And so, in the coiled silence of the serpent's choice, Cleopatra writes her own ending, a final breath of sovereignty against the weight of empire. Yet, even as she slips into eternity, her children remain fragile heirs in a world reshaped by conquest. The silence after Cleopatra's death is heavy, almost unbearable. Alexandria, once vibrant with the pulse of revelry and politics, feels hollow as though its marble colonnades have exhaled their last breath. The queen is gone, the asps sting closing one story forever. Yet within the palace, in chambers shadowed by grief, her children remain, not rulers, not heirs, but fragile remnants of a broken dream. History often crowns and buries its figures in quick succession, but children linger. They are not yet myths, not yet symbols, but flesh and blood carrying both promise and peril. For Cleopatra's sons and daughter, the loss of their mother is more than personal. It is the unraveling of a world. The last pharaoh has chosen her fate, but her children are left to be chosen by others. The eldest is Caesarion, formerly named Ptolemy XV. Though Rome mocks him as the little Caesar, he is 17, on the edge of manhood, yet still unready for the weight his name demands. Born of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, he carries in his veins the bloodlines of two civilizations. To Egyptians, he is the rightful heir, the son of a goddess queen and Rome's most celebrated general. To Octavian, however, he is danger incarnate, a living rival, a threat to the delicate fabric of Roman power. For Rome allows no rivals, least of all one who could claim both the Nile and Caesar's mantle. It is said that Cleopatra, even in her final hours, whispered fears for him. She begged for his safety, though she must have known mercy would not be his fate. Rome's logic is cold, unbending. Octavian's men hunt him down as he flees south along the Nile, and the boy who might have been emperor never lives to see Rome. His life ends in silence, erased before it begins. The other children are younger, their innocence sharper in contrast to the storm around them. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, are only 10 years old. Their names already bear the weight of legend. Helios, the sun; Selene, the moon. The Nile had cradled them as symbols of unity between East and West, their births celebrated with festivals, their lives woven into the rituals of the court. Now, stripped of their mother's protection, they are no longer celestial heirs but political spoils. Alongside them is their little brother, Ptolemy Philadelphus, barely 6 years old. Too young to understand, he clings to his sister's hand as strangers surround them. Soldiers usher them away from the palace that once glittered with banquets and music, leading them instead toward an unknown destiny. Their small voices, frightened and trembling, echo through halls where once the laughter of gods and queens had resounded. Octavian's gaze falls upon them not as children, but as symbols. They are reminders of Antony's defiance, Cleopatra's ambition, and Egypt's resistance. Yet they are also valuable, not as heirs but as trophies. Rome has always understood the power of spectacle, and parading royal children in chains will speak louder than any battle report. The journey to Rome is long, and in its course the children see their world vanish. Alexandria's harbour fades behind them. The Nile, once endless and eternal, becomes memory. They sail across seas, not as royals, but as captives, their guards watchful, their futures uncertain. The salt air of the Mediterranean is sharp and cold compared to the warm winds of Egypt, and perhaps the children feel, even then, that they are leaving behind not just their homeland, but their very identities. When they arrive in Rome, the city prepares its triumph. Octavian, Now Augustus rides in glory, the conqueror of Egypt, the unchallenged master of the Roman world. The people cheer, garlands scatter, drums thunder. And behind him, as living proof of his victory, walk the children of Cleopatra and Antony. It is a cruel theatre. Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, clad in golden chains, are displayed before the roaring crowd. The boy who bore the name of the sun lowers his gaze, humiliated before strangers, while the girl named for the moon holds tightly to her brother's hand. Ptolemy, still a child, stumbles beside them, bewildered. Their young faces, solemn and afraid, are the silent chorus to Rome's triumphal march. Cleopatra, in choosing her death, has escaped this humiliation, but her children endure it, and yet Rome does not destroy them. Perhaps it is Augustus's pragmatism, perhaps the intercession of others, perhaps the sheer youth of the children that spares them. Instead, they are placed in the household of Octavia, Augustus's sister, the same Octavia once scorned by Antony in favor of Cleopatra. Fate weaves its iron threads tightly, binding enemies into reluctant family. Under Octavia's care, the children grow. Caesarion is already gone. But the twins and their little brother survive for a time. Their Egyptian titles are stripped, their future recast in Roman mold. History grows quieter around them. Their names appear less often, their presence dimming. Ptolemy Philadelphus vanishes into the folds of time, his life too brief, too obscured to trace. Alexander Helios too fades from the record, the sun swallowed by silence. But Cleopatra Selene endures. Of all the children, she carries her mother's strength most clearly. Though paraded in chains as a child, she grows into a woman who learns how to bend without breaking. Rome arranges her marriage to King Juba, the second of Mauritania, a loyal client king. In North Africa, far from Alexandria, she reigns as queen in her own right, her mother's legacy carried into foreign soil. Temples are raised in her honor, coins are struck with her likeness, and through her, Cleopatra's bloodline threads onward into history. Yet even with this survival, the story of Cleopatra's children is one of loss. The Nile that once whispered their names grows silent under Roman rule. Egypt becomes a province, its sovereignty dissolved. For the children, their lives are not their own but instruments in the grand designs of empire. Their laughter fades into Rome's streets, their Egyptian titles vanish, and their memories become faint echoes, half remembered by poets and chroniclers. Every empire leaves behind orphans. Some are real, like these fragile heirs of Cleopatra and Antony. Others are symbolic. The temples abandoned, the languages suppressed, the traditions smothered beneath new rulers. The children of the last pharaoh are both living orphans and the embodiment of a kingdom that has lost its breath. Yet perhaps, in the quiet of memory, the Nile still holds them. Rivers remember what history forgets. In the endless current, in the whisper of reeds and the flight of birds over water, the names of Caesarion, Helios, Selene, and Ptolemy linger like soft prayers. Though Rome has claimed their future, Egypt claims their memory. And so, the children of Cleopatra pass from the brilliance of one empire into the shadow of another. Their lives, small and trembling, are caught between worlds too vast for them to master. They are not conquerors, nor queens, nor generals, only children left behind by history's tide. In their silence, we hear the cost of empire. For when queens and generals fall, it is often children who carry the sorrow forward. And beyond the palace, beyond the orphans, a greater silence spreads, the death of a kingdom itself. The death of Cleopatra does not end with the quiet of a chamber. It ripples outward, through palace corridors, through the harbours of Alexandria, and into the very soil of Egypt. Her choice, her serpent's sting, is not only the closing of a life, but the extinguishing of a kingdom. For more than 3,000 years, Egypt has stood sovereign, land of pharaohs, keeper of gods, cradle of the Nile. Now, with one queen's final breath, that sovereignty dissolves into the hands of Rome. The people of Alexandria sense it first. Their queen is gone, their general Antony lies buried beside her, and in the streets the banners of Rome rise where once the emblems of the Ptolemies had flown. The harbour, once a gateway to a proud and restless world, is now filled with Roman ships, oaken, massive, their sails blotting the horizon like iron wings. Soldiers march through the streets, their sandals striking against stone in rhythms unfamiliar to Egyptian ears. The city does not erupt in rebellion, it folds in silence, the weight of inevitability pressing too heavily upon it. Octavian claims Egypt not as a province of Rome's Senate, but as his own personal domain. It is too rich, too strategic, too powerful to be left to senators who might dream of independence. Grain from the Nile will fill Rome's granaries, feeding its people, securing Augustus's power. The wealth of temples and palaces is seized, carried away to fund new monuments along the Tiber. Egypt is no longer mistress of its fate. It is now Rome's most precious jewel. Temples that once rang with the hymns of priests grow quieter. The gods of Egypt, Ra, Isis, Osiris, still linger in the hearts of the people, but their political power wanes. Rome tolerates worship but strips away sovereignty. Priests who once advised kings now serve under governors. Rituals continue. Incense still burns, but the gods have lost their throne. The pharaohs were seen as divine, bridges between earth and sky, but with Cleopatra's passing, that bridge collapses. For the first time in millennia, Egypt has no living embodiment of divinity. The Nile, eternal and indifferent, continues its cycle. Each year it rises, flooding fields with silt, sustaining life as it always has. Farmers bend to their tasks, planting, harvesting, repeating the rhythms of their ancestors. To them, Rome may feel distant, a name on a tax collector's lips, a shadow behind new decrees. Yet even here, in the quiet villages along the river, the shift is felt. Taxes rise, harvests are measured with Roman eyes, and the surplus that once fed Egypt now flows northward to feed another empire. The Nile remains generous, but its bounty no longer belongs fully to Egypt. The death of a kingdom is rarely loud. It is not only the clash of armies or the fall of walls, but the slow absorption of identity into something larger, something foreign. It is in the way children learn Latin words alongside Egyptian ones, the way Roman coins replace those stamped with Cleopatra's face, the way officials in togas sit where pharaohs once presided. Gradually, the symbols of sovereignty vanish, replaced by the symbols of empire. And yet, within the silence, there is mourning. Not all mourning is loud. Much of it is private, whispered, carried like embers in the soul. The people of Egypt remember. They remember the golden age of pyramids, the long reigns of Ramses and Hatshepsut, the mighty temples that rose from desert sands. They remember Cleopatra herself, not as Rome painted her, but as the queen who walked among them, who spoke their language, who styled herself as Isis reborn. Their grief is not only for a queen, but for a lineage that stretches back into myth. Octavian, now Augustus, orders the city stabilized. He establishes governors, administrators, soldiers. The machinery of empire is efficient, relentless. Roads are built, trade flourishes, laws are enforced. To the Roman world, Egypt is no longer a rival but a prize. To the Egyptian heart, it is a loss immeasurable. Sovereignty has been exchanged for order, pride has been exchanged for survival, and yet, history is not so easily erased. The monuments remain. The pyramids stand as silent witnesses, their stones older than Rome itself. The Sphinx watches with unreadable eyes as legions march past. Temples carved with hieroglyphs continue to rise from desert sands, their walls proclaiming stories that no conqueror can silence. The memory of Egypt's grandeur lingers, a ghost that even empire cannot banish. But memory is not power. Power rests now in Rome. The Senate hails Augustus as savior, his triumph secure, his dominion unchallenged. The wealth of Egypt flows northward, enriching an empire that will endure for centuries. Cleopatra becomes legend, Antony a cautionary tale, and Egypt itself, once sovereign, now subject, becomes a backdrop to Rome's glory. The death of a kingdom is not sudden, it is a lingering twilight. For years after Cleopatra's passing, Egyptians continue their rituals, farmers work the fields, life seems to go on. But beneath the surface, the identity of Egypt as an independent world has ended. Its flame is out, the last pharaoh is gone, and with her, the ancient line that bound gods to kings, kings to people, and people to the eternal Nile. And yet the Nile still flows. That is the paradox. Kingdoms may die, but rivers endure. The land itself remembers, even when rulers change. The people still look to the Nile as lifeblood, still measure time by its floods. They may bow to Rome, but in their hearts they carry the rhythm of Egypt. The gods may fall silent in the temples, but in the fields, in the songs of laborers, in the stories whispered to children, fragments remain. Rome believes it has conquered Egypt, but Egypt also begins to conquer Rome in subtler ways. Egyptian deities find their way into Roman worship. Isis temples rise in the heart of Rome itself. Egyptian art, motifs, and ideas blend into the fabric of the empire. Cleopatra's story travels across seas, reshaped, retold, but never forgotten. Though the kingdom is dead, its ghost lingers, powerful, magnetic, eternal. The death of Egypt as an independent kingdom is real, yet its afterlife is vast. In memory, in culture, in myth, Egypt continues. Perhaps this is the truest fate of nations. They vanish in power, yet live on in remembrance. The people who once saw Cleopatra pass in splendor now tell stories of her dignity, her choice, her end. And in those stories, something survives, not sovereignty, but soul. Thus, the kingdom ends not with thunder, but with quiet, not with fire, but with silence. The death of Egypt is written not only in decrees and borders, but in the stillness of temples without pharaohs, in the hush of gods without power, in the fading of a flame carried for 3,000 years. The last pharaoh has gone to her rest, and the land she ruled has become the jewel of another's crown. And yet, as the night falls over Alexandria, one can almost imagine the Nile whispering differently, as if it, too, knows the sorrow of what has been lost. For though kingdoms die, rivers remember. Egypt has folded into Rome, its sovereignty extinguished, its temples hushed, yet in the marble and the papyrus, in the stones and the river's flow, echoes remain. And those echoes will become memory, story, and legend, carried forward in the words of poets, sculptors, and chroniclers who reshape her tale. History rarely leaves us silence. Even when a reign ends, When the stones of a palace fall to dust and the voices of a people are swallowed by empire, something lingers. A name, a gesture, a rumor, a fragment of story, like a seashell washed ashore long after the tide has gone out. So it is with Cleopatra. Her body lies hidden, her city subdued, her line broken, yet her image stirs on in marble, papyrus, and memory. The first to write of her are the Romans, the victors who carry her memory like a spoil of war. To them, she is less a queen and more a symbol, an embodiment of Eastern luxury, of womanly danger, of the supposed decadence that Rome must discipline. In their chronicles, she is no longer the strategist who spoke many tongues, nor the ruler who balanced a kingdom on fragile alliances. She is the woman who enthralled Caesar, who bewitched Antony, who dared to defy Rome. It is a familiar pattern in history. The vanquished are remembered in the words of the conquerors. Cleopatra becomes the story Rome needs her to be. For Octavian, soon Augustus, her downfall is proof of his triumph, not only over Antony, but over the chaos and temptations that threatened Rome. She is cast as the serpent, Antony as her prey, and Octavian as the deliverer. Through this lens, she becomes not a sovereign queen, but a cautionary tale. And yet, even as the Romans reduce her, they cannot quite silence her. The very energy of their words keeps her alive. Plutarch, writing generations later, admits her charm was not only of beauty but of wit, voice, and presence. Her appeal was less about features and more about the way she entered a room, the music of her speech, the sparkle of her intellect. Through him, a glimpse of the living woman emerges from beneath the layers of Roman disdain. Marble too carries her shadow. Coins minted in her reign show her with strong features, sharp nose, bold profile, a queen who wants to be recognized as a ruler, not merely as ornament. Later Roman statues smooth these edges, softening her, reshaping her into the figure of exotic allure they preferred. Each chisel stroke tells less about her and more about those who carved her image. So it is with papyrus, with ink and parchment. Poets fold her into verse, each line bending her life toward allegory. In Virgil's Aeneid, she appears in the great pageant of history carved upon Aeneas' shield. A dark queen of the Nile, standing with her strange gods against Rome's destined order. Here, she is a shadow cast against the brilliance of empire. Her defeat is foretold. Her place is not as a sovereign, but as the foil to Rome's eternal light. Yet myth, even when wielded against someone, has its strange mercy. What Rome hoped to diminish, time enlarges. For as centuries pass, the woman they tried to contain in ridicule grows into something more enduring, a figure of fascination endlessly reimagined. In the Middle Ages, her story wanders like a ghost through chronicles and romances. Sometimes she is condemned as a temptress, a warning against female ambition. Other times she is exalted as an emblem of tragic love. Her death beside Antony turned into a tale of loyalty beyond empire. The serpent becomes not a mark of shame but a symbol of sovereignty. The final choice of a queen who would not be paraded in chains. Painters take up her story. On canvas she reclines, pale skin against dark silks, an asp at her breast. Each brush captures not Cleopatra herself, but the artist's own century. Their anxieties, their desires, their gaze upon women, power and death. Renaissance painters see her as a biblical Eve, her sin wrapped in beauty. Baroque painters cast her in scenes of sumptuous drama, surrounded by attendants, draped in jewels, her death made into theatre. The Enlightenment reshapes her yet again. To some thinkers, she is the emblem of tyranny's corruption, to others a symbol of freedom against empire. Napoleon, gazing upon her story as he campaigns in Egypt, sees not a woman but a mirror of his own ambition. Her memory fuels conquest even as it resists it. And through it all, the papyrus, the marble, the ink and brush, one truth remains: Cleopatra becomes a vessel. Each age pours into her the meanings it craves, the fears it cannot voice, the longings it dares not confess. She is never still, she is myth in motion. Even now, her name carries the weight of paradox. To some, she is the enchantress, the seductress whose charms toppled men. To others, she is the last pharaoh, the guardian of a land slipping into Rome's shadow. To yet others, she is simply a woman. Clever, resourceful, desperate to preserve her kingdom against a tide too vast to resist. We may ask, who was she truly? Was she the strategist who bound herself to Caesar, or the mother who feared for her children's lives? Was she the sovereign who calculated every move, or the woman who wept as her city burned? The record is fragmented, the truth obscured by centuries of retelling. But perhaps the multiplicity itself is part of her power. For what is history if not a chorus of echoes? Marble speaks one way, papyrus another, a painter's brush yet another. None alone can give us the whole, but together they weave something more enduring than fact. They give us presence. Cleopatra may be lost, but the resonance of her life continues. Each age finds her again, reclothing her in words and images, keeping her alive by the very act of remembering. And so she stands, timeless, a queen of shadows and myth. Whether villain or heroine, temptress or sovereign, she is never forgotten. Her story becomes a mirror for ours, reminding us how history itself is less about certainty than about the meanings we draw from those who came before. Perhaps this is the final sovereignty Cleopatra holds, not over a kingdom of sand and river, but over memory itself. In every age, she rules again, not in palaces of stone, but in the imaginations of those who speak her name. In the end, marble cracks, papyrus fades, but the echo remains, whispering not only of Cleopatra, but of the city she once ruled, a city whose silence we now enter. The river flows on. It has flowed before Cleopatra, and it flows after her, unbroken, unhurried, eternal. Its surface glimmers in the sunlight of centuries, a mirror to the heavens above, while beneath, the currents turn with a memory deeper than human time. The Nile has seen empires rise like morning mist, only to dissolve when the heat of history grows too fierce. It has known the feet of pharaohs and peasants alike, each leaving a brief trace on its banks, only to vanish while the river carries on. And in the whisper of its waters, one name still lingers: Cleopatra. Rome may have swallowed Egypt into its vast dominion, folding its gods and temples into silence, but the river does not forget. Where marble crumbles, the reeds sway. Where archives burn, the current holds secrets. For the Nile is both tomb and cradle. It buries, yet it preserves. Travelers who come in later centuries find the people of the valley still telling stories of their queen. Not always the same stories Rome tells, not always polished with propaganda or gilded with myth, but something quieter, closer to the heart. To them she is not only the queen of Antony, not only the woman who defied Octavian, but a daughter of the river itself. They whisper that the Nile took her spirit back into its waters, where it mingles with the floods that nourish the land each year. The peasants in the fields do not write histories. Their voices do not appear in marble inscriptions or scrolls carried across empires. but their memory passed through story, through lullabies, through murmured prayers, endures longer than the chronicles of Rome. Children hear her name spoken as though she is a goddess who walked in human form. Women remember her not only for her throne, but for her fierce protection of her children, her defiance in the face of conquest, her unwillingness to kneel. Time passes. Rome reshapes Egypt, and Alexandria becomes another jewel in the crown of the Caesars. The temples are repurposed, the gods forgotten, the libraries silenced. But as long as the Nile rises and falls, Cleopatra is not erased. Her name drifts with the papyrus boats. Her image lingers in broken statues buried in silt. Her story echoes not in the Senate's records, but in the pulse of the river. The Nile has always been Egypt's truest archive. Its floods bring both destruction and renewal. They wash away fields, but they also lay down the black soil that feeds the land. In the same way, the river covers over the dust of history, yet nourishes memory with each season's return. Cleopatra's story becomes part of this rhythm, half forgotten, half remembered, always present in the undercurrent. Centuries later, when new empires come, Byzantines, Arabs, Ottomans, the river still flows unchanged. The names of rulers shift, the banners change colour, but the Nile carries on with its eternal patience. Fishermen still tell of the queen who was as radiant as the dawn. Scholars still debate her choices. Poets still imagine her last hours. And always, beneath it all, the Nile remembers. There is something about rivers that resists forgetting. Unlike stone, which crumbles, or papyrus, which decays, water renews itself endlessly, carrying the same essence forward. A river does not preserve by holding still, but by moving, by refusing to stop. So too does memory endure, not by freezing in one moment, but by flowing, reshaping, reimagining with each retelling. Cleopatra becomes more than herself. She becomes a reflection, a symbol, a spirit carried forward by each age that speaks her name. When Arab chroniclers later pass through Egypt, they hear local tales of her wisdom and cunning. They call her a magician, a philosopher, a woman of both beauty and intellect. In their writings, she becomes the embodiment of Egypt's lost grandeur. Even when they fold her into legends not her own, the root of her story remains nourished by the river. And when European travellers come, centuries later, searching ruins and relics, they too hear her name whispered in the breeze along the Nile. They dig into sand and stone, but it is the water that still carries her most faithfully. The Nile knows no language, no empire, no propaganda. It knows only the eternal rhythm of rise and fall, and within that rhythm, Cleopatra is eternal too. The story of the Nile and Cleopatra is not only about memory, it is also about silence. For memory survives not only in what is said, but also in what is not spoken. The Nile keeps her secrets, as it has always kept the secrets of Egypt. The tombs of pharaohs, hidden for millennia beneath sand, were guarded by silence. The river itself has swallowed temples, columns, and palaces whole, concealing them beneath its depths. Perhaps, too, it keeps safe the truest memories of Cleopatra, those no historian could capture, those no conqueror could erase. In this way, Cleopatra's survival is paradoxical. The more Rome tried to define her, the more she slipped away into legend. The more history tried to capture her, the more she flowed into myth. Like the Nile itself, she resists control. She cannot be held by one story, one culture, one empire. She belongs to time, to eternity, to the ceaseless current of memory. The Nile does not speak in words, yet it speaks in presence. Standing at its banks, one feels the weight of ages pressing close, as if the air itself remembers. To stand where Cleopatra once stood, to see the same water shimmer in sunlight, is to sense that she is not gone. Her reflection is still there, faint and flickering, like the moon upon the river at night. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of history. What is loved, what is mourned, what is remembered, is never truly lost. Cleopatra's life ended in the silence of a chamber, with the weight of empire closing in, but the Nile gave her another ending. It carried her onward, mingling her name with its eternal flow. As night falls over Egypt, the river shines beneath the stars. The same stars Cleopatra once gazed upon, the same constellations mirrored in the dark water. The people along its banks sleep, but the Nile does not. It keeps its vigil, as it always has, bearing memories through darkness, carrying them toward dawn. Cleopatra's kingdom is gone, her throne broken, her bloodline scattered. But her presence endures, because the Nile remembers. It remembers in silence, in whispers, in the shimmer of moonlight upon its endless waters. And so long as the river flows, so too does her story, not just as a queen, not just as a lover, not just as a ruler who defied Rome, but as a spirit entwined with the eternal heart of Egypt itself. The river remembers what marble and empire forget. And as its waters flow toward the sea, they carry us onward too, where the legacy of the last Pharaoh takes its final shape in the echoes of eternity. Legacy is a fragile thing. It does not live in stone alone, nor in scrolls, nor in monuments raised by human hands. Legacy lives in the memories carried forward, in the way a name continues to stir hearts long after the body has gone to dust. And Cleopatra's legacy is unlike that of any other queen. Hers is not only a record of rule, nor a tally of battles won and lost. It is a mirror that reflects the very soul of an age, the end of one world and the uncertain birth of another. When Cleopatra breathes her last, Egypt as an independent kingdom breathes its last with her. She is not merely a queen who dies, she is the closing of an era. For 3,000 years, pharaohs had walked the palaces and temples of the Nile. They were god-kings, intermediaries between heaven and earth, voices of the divine among mortals. Cleopatra is the last of them. A daughter of Ptolemy, yet also, in her people's eyes, the living goddess Isis herself. When she dies, the thread snaps. Egypt does not simply lose a ruler, it loses its soul of sovereignty. And yet, paradoxically, in losing, she also preserves. For Cleopatra's choice, her refusal to march in Octavian's triumph, her embrace of death as dignity, leaves a mark Rome cannot erase. Octavian may claim Egypt, may claim her treasures, may even parade her children in his city, but he cannot claim her surrender. Her death becomes her last act of rule, her final decree. In choosing her own end, she denies Rome its victory over her person, even if it claims her throne. History bends here, quietly yet decisively. Octavian rises as Augustus, Rome's first emperor, shaping a dominion that will stretch across centuries. But the empire he builds is forged in the shadow of Cleopatra's fall. Egypt's wealth flows into Rome, its grain feeding the masses, its symbols of kingship enriching Roman pomp. The very crown of Augustus gleams brighter because Cleopatra no longer wears hers. Her death is the soil in which a new empire roots itself, and so her legacy is double-edged. She is remembered as the end of Egypt's independence, yet also as the queen whose defiance forced Rome to redefine itself. Her shadow lingers over Augustus's Rome, haunting it with questions of power, desire, and fate. How is she remembered? That depends on who is speaking. To the Romans who feared her, Cleopatra is the foreign temptress, the embodiment of decadence, the queen whose charms nearly pulled one of their greatest generals away from Roman duty. In their telling, she is danger wrapped in beauty, Egypt itself reduced to a woman's face. To poets of Rome, she is mythic, a figure who walks the line between mortal and divine, whose courage in death inspires awe even in her enemies. Virgil, Horace, Propertius, they all write of her, some with disdain, some with respect. In their words, she becomes more than flesh and blood. She becomes symbol. For Rome, she is the test of its strength, the foil against which it defines its own virtue. But memory does not belong to conquerors alone. In Egypt, among the people who lived by the Nile's rise and fall, her memory endures in quieter ways. She is the queen who spoke their language, who stood before their gods, who walked not as a distant foreign ruler, but as one of their own. For them, she is not simply a seductress nor a schemer, but the last pharaoh who dared to embody the land itself. When the Nile flows, they remember her as its daughter. This tension, between Rome's suspicion and Egypt's devotion, between disdain and reverence, shapes Cleopatra's legacy across the centuries. She is never only one thing. She is always a prism bending the light of memory into many colors. As centuries pass, the image of Cleopatra shifts with each new age that tells her story. To medieval chroniclers, she becomes a figure of wisdom and mystery, folded into tales of alchemy and hidden knowledge. To Renaissance artists, she is the embodiment of tragic beauty, her death by the asp painted again and again, her body draped in elegance even in its final hour. To Enlightenment thinkers, she is a lesson in ambition, a cautionary tale of the dangers of passion and politics. And in modern times, she is rediscovered once more. Scholars seek the real woman behind the myths, peeling back layers of propaganda to glimpse her mind, her politics, her intelligence. Artists and writers reimagine her not only as a beauty, but as a strategist, a survivor, a woman who bore the weight of empire in her hands. Each generation remakes her, but in the remaking, they keep her alive. This, too, is legacy, to be unforgotten, to be endlessly reinterpreted, to remain relevant long after one's time has ended. Cleopatra becomes a mirror in which every age sees itself reflected. Some see desire, some see power, some see tragedy, some see resilience. And through it all, her name remains carried forward like the Nile's eternal current. It is worth pausing to remember that legacy is not only how others remember us, but also the unseen ripples of our choices. Cleopatra's death does not only alter Rome's triumph, it shapes the destiny of her children, of her city, of her land. Her son Caesarion, the boy who might have carried both Egypt and Rome in his blood, is executed on Octavian's orders. Her other children are raised in Rome, their lives folded into the empire that conquered their mother. Even here, her legacy is marked by sorrow, a reminder that empire leaves orphans, that history is often written in loss. And yet, within that loss, something persists. Cleopatra's children may vanish into the folds of history, but her story does not. Her life becomes part of the world's memory, part of the collective imagination that binds past and present. The weight of her choices, to rule fiercely, to love boldly, to die with dignity, echoes forward. What does her legacy tell us, then? That power is fleeting, but dignity endures. That beauty may capture attention, but courage secures remembrance. That empires may rise and fall, but the human heart remembers not only victories, but the defiant grace of those who refuse to kneel. Cleopatra's legacy is not only Egypt's, it is the world's. She belongs to every storyteller who whispers her name, every artist who paints her face, every listener who wonders at her fate. She is both myth and memory, both woman and symbol. She is the last breath of an ancient kingdom, but also a timeless echo that refuses to fade. The night deepens, and we return to the river. The Nile flows quietly beneath the stars, bearing its eternal burden of memory. In its waters, Cleopatra's reflection still lingers, shimmering like moonlight upon its surface. She is gone, yet she is here. Forgotten, yet remembered. Mortal, yet eternal. The last pharaoh has fallen, but her legacy rises again and again, reshaped by each generation that dares to look into her story. She is no longer only Cleopatra of Egypt. She is Cleopatra of memory, Cleopatra of history, Cleopatra of legend. Her life and death remind us that to be human is to reach for eternity. Even if only for a moment, even if only through a story whispered long after we are gone. The last pharaoh's voice fades, but her echo remains, in rivers, in stories, in the hearts of those who remember. And as we close her chapter, we step softly into silence where all history rests, waiting for the next story to awaken. And so, the candle of Cleopatra's life flickers still, not extinguished by the centuries, but carried forward as a gentle glow in the corridors of memory. Hers was a story not only of crowns and armies, but of the fragile beauty of human longing, for love, for power, for permanence in a world that yields to time. Though her marble halls have fallen, though the tides of the Nile have washed her footprints away, her echo hums in the quiet, reminding us that even the most luminous lives are threads woven into the same vast tapestry of impermanence that holds us all. Thank you, dear listener, for sharing this quiet space with me tonight. In sitting here together beneath the hush of history, we have kept alive something more than dates and names. We have carried forward a flame of remembrance, and in it, perhaps, found a reflection of ourselves. Now, may the weight of your day slip gently from your shoulders. May your breath soften, your thoughts loosen, and your dreams carry you kindly through the night. Sleep well beneath the timeless lullaby of the past, where every ending folds into a beginning, and every silence holds a story. This has been the Sleeping Hourglass, where the past tucks you in. If this brought you a measure of peace, know that you are always welcome to return, to rest again in the company of history's whispers. And as the night deepens, may you drift, like the slow current of the Nile, toward stillness, toward wonder, toward sleep.